This meeting showed up as now on my calendar, but I was looking at the email and I see on the email it says 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So is the calendar appointment wrong? Does anyone know? And is the meeting then 1? Now on my calendar, but I was looking at the email.
It's correct. We set up the Zoom to start 30 minutes ahead. So they will start the session at 1 p.m. So in about, 20 minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure.
Welcome everybody to this hearing. This is Tom Plant, Commissioner on the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, and I want to first of all start out by thanking everybody for participating in this exciting discussion and for your comments and for participating in this hearing and the proceeding as it goes forward. We really cannot do this well without your participation, and so really appreciate all the companies and organizations and individuals that have chosen to participate in this and help us as we go through this proceeding. First of all, I also want to thank Commissioner Gilman for her work and leadership on this issue prior to my being named hearing officer. She did a lot of great background work and put a lot of time in, and I really appreciate that work. Also, I want to thank Nicholas Foss for his leadership on the research team and doing background research on BPPs that contributed to the hearing. And finally, I want to thank Ms. Dundas for keeping me out of legal peril. It's a big job. So far, so good. So we are now on the record. This is a workshop in proceeding number 23M-0466EG. In this proceeding, the Commission is exploring third-party implementation of certain pilot programs in the electric and natural gas service areas of Public Service Company of Colorado in accordance with Decision C-230413, Public Service Last DSM and BE Strategic Issues Proceeding. In Decision C-230413 at paragraph 207, the Commission concluded the following. The Commission agrees with the Colorado Energy Office and others who have argued that the Colorado legislature has passed several statutes that prioritize beneficial electrification adoption and seek to limit gas and electric infrastructure investments and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It is incumbent upon the Commission to implement these goals as opportunities arise, as well as to direct efforts to maximize the value of ratepayer-funded investments made in utility infrastructure. Public Service Company of Colorado argued specific proposals should be conveyed and supported in planned proceedings. We find that given the legislative guidance and lackluster performance in some of these areas by the companies thus far, it's not appropriate to wait until an upcoming plan application to assess various concepts related to third-party provision of gas demand response services, virtual power plants, and other innovations that may be available from the private sector. Accordingly, the Commission, it says intends to, but here we are, open in the near future a miscellaneous docket to further explore these issues and garner stakeholder input on reasonable parameters for company-issued request for proposals. In accordance with decision number C-230413, the request for proposals for third-party implementation of pilots would focus on three pilots. First, virtual power plants. Second, natural gas demand response. And third, neighborhood electrification. So the main objectives of this proceeding include, first of all, identifying the core objectives and timelines for the three pilots. Second, setting the main technical cost and time parameters for the RFPs. Third, establishing milestones for the RFPs. And fourth, setting operational and reporting milestones for the pilots. And the purpose of today's hearing is to collect information from stakeholders and from the company and further explore the areas of interest highlighted by decision number R-23-06371 related to the development of implementation of RFPs for the contemplated pilots. Today is October 11th, 2023. I am Commissioner Tom Plant, the hearing commissioner for this proceeding. I've been designated by a vote of the three commissioners to hear this matter and to issue a recommended decision for consideration by the full commission. So as far as logistics go, this hearing is webcast on the internet. It'll be live at all times during the hearing, including during breaks. So be mindful of your video and microphone at all times. Advisors have circulated an anticipated agenda for this proceeding. I'll begin with Xcel Energy to discuss various matters for about 20 minutes. We'll move on to the registered speakers. First recurve, then Z&E and Sirius controls. The Colorado Solar and Storage Association has asked to be removed from the agenda, so they will not be on the agenda as originally contemplated. So we will go after Z&E and Sirius controls, we will go to Sunrun, then Mission Data, then Advanced Energy United, and then we'll open up and take comments from any interested attendees. Please recognize that, as you all know, we could spend a week on each of the issues that are possible under this topic, and I don't expect we're going to resolve everything in this hearing, but rather raise issues for the commission to be aware of, identify potential pathways forward for an RFP process to achieve the pilot's objectives, identify potential models the commission should consider. And remember, of course, we're still very early in the proceedings. So if you hear something today you would like to comment further on, please file post-hearing written comments through the e-filing system on our website. Please utilize the Zoom raise hand feature if you have something to add during another speaker's discussion. If you're calling in by phone, you can unmute your phone, and that will also signal that you wish to speak. I may call on speakers out of order if it facilitates a conversation, such as comment and response. We have an agenda set for a couple hours, but we have more time if necessary to have a full discussion of topics. The notice stated the hearing is from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock. I don't expect we'll need all that time, but I also don't expect us to be pressed for time today. So I don't plan on imposing any strict time limits on comments. However, if the need arises, I'll ask you to wind up your comments. If you have written comments prepared, there's no need to read them verbatim as oral comments. Instead, please provide oral comments as a summary of key points and then file the written comments. The written comments can be filed directly in this proceeding number 23M-0466EG through the Commission's e-filings website. Written comments can also be submitted through the Commission's website at puc.colorado.gov by clicking the File a Comment or Complaint link. And you can certainly continue the discussion through the post-filing hearing comments on the issue, and we encourage you to do so. Finally, I ask that commenters today are mindful to avoid speaking on topics concerning other cases, particularly to avoid repeating in this proceeding positions that they are advocating in ongoing litigated cases. This is important to ensure that the advocacy of these issues occurs within the litigated proceeding with notice to other parties and opportunity to respond. So if your comments today veer too close to a litigated case, I or counsel will have to interject and ask you to move on to another point. An example of this would be a commenter improperly advocating in this hearing for a specific position or a change that they have raised in Public Service Clean Heat Plan, proceeding number 23A-0392EG, which is currently before the full commission for review. With that, I want to thank you all again for taking the time to be here today and to share your comments. So let's start the proceeding first with a public service company. I'm looking forward to your presentation. If you want to start, I guess we could start with the Brattle Gas DR study that you included in your submission of comments, and maybe talk about what some of your takeaways were from that study.
Sure. Good afternoon, Commissioner Plant. Let me just do a sound check here to see if you can hear me okay.
You bet. Sure can.
Perfect. We just had a few brief introductory comments. I promise no more than 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go right to the Brattle study. So if it's okay by you, we'd like to proceed that way.
Sounds great.
So first, I just want to recognize and acknowledge the timeliness of the conversation. We really appreciate the commission convening various stakeholders on the topic, and we were heartened to see the robustness of the responses and the comments, and I think a lot of commonality is there as well. The second point I want to make is that virtual power plant is a relatively new term, but it's not something we're unfamiliar with at Xcel Energy. We've had programs over the last several decades where we've cultivated several hundred megawatts of capacity that we've been able to use to better manage and more efficiently manage our grid at the bulk level, increasingly more so at the distribution level. So while the concept of VPP is nothing new, I think, in my opinion, really what the company is starting to see is the proliferation of distributed energy resources. Along with that comes the connectivity of those resources and the software platforms that are capable of managing them. So it's really an exciting time to be able to bring all those things together. So recognizing some of those foundational changes that we begin to see in our system and some of the providers that we have in our service territory offering these programs to customers, we've already begun to lean into this a little bit. I was pleased to see that many of the commenters recognize our Renewable Battery Connect program in Colorado, which is a VPP program we launched as part of our Renewable Energy Standard Plan back in 2021, 2022. In addition, many commenters recognize the important role of technology platforms like demand response management systems and DERMS in being able to establish and facilitate VPP programs. So in short, we were really heartened and pleased to see a lot of the comments there recognizing the critical role of the utility there. The programs we have today and wish to continue to expand upon, as well as the technologies that will allow us to do that, I think very much align with the comments we saw. So just wanted to open with those few remarks. Obviously, we filed comments on gas DR as well. And as we noted in our comments, we are bringing a similar proposal forward in the Clean Heat Plan on the neighborhood electrification. So we'll probably refrain from commenting on that. But that was the opening remark, and I'll turn it over to Sean White here, one of our SMEs, to introduce and discuss the Brattle study.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Plant. I'm Sean White. I'm a director in our demand side management program area. Specifically to the Brattle study, starting with the Brattle study that was concluded in June of 2022. That study found that we have about 7% of our total peak load under control in our demand response programs, or about 496 megawatts. That puts us in top 5% of investor-owned utilities for the amount of summer peak controllable load that we have in our portfolio. It also found that the new DR that we intend to acquire will need to reduce system load more frequently during different hours of the day, in more months of the year, and even including the winter. That means that new DR resources will need to be more diverse than just summer availability. And they found that some of those emerging opportunities for controllable load, live in time of use rates, managed EV charging, behavioral DR or peak time rebates, battery storage, of course, was identified as an emerging opportunity. And all of these, the companies launch programs or pilots for today, but have a ways to grow. The incremental DR goals for both summer and winter were established in the last DSM strategic issues filings. And the company will be proposing in its next DSM plan, DSM triennial, at the end of this month, how we propose to achieve those. In subsequent discussions with the Brattle group, they identified about 15 variations on the definition of a virtual power plant. But the common themes in those definitions inform the company's comments for its proposed definition in this docket. Shifting to gas demand response, Brattle found that many utilities, including Xcel, have interruptible tariffs, but that gas DR programs that offer incentives to customer participants is relatively new in our industry. They found 8 utilities have gas DR that Brattle could identify, and programs are largely dominated by thermostat programs, which Xcel has today and is testing the gas demand response reductions as part of that. The C&I programs, commercial and industrial programs that they found do show a lot of promise at those utilities, but is more of a limited opportunity for Xcel since it has few large retail gas customers, while we do have a lot of large transport gas customers. The company did conduct a demand response RFI. We received 14 concepts from 12 respondents. And as a result of the evaluation of those concepts, we are preparing an RFP to be issued for programs or pilots that could help us expand our demand response portfolio. So that was an overview. And in conclusion, I'll just say, reiterating some of the things that Zach brought forward, we are excited about the expansion and advancement of demand response and its evolution into virtual power plants. We're frequently meeting with technology providers and trade partners to identify emerging capabilities, program and incentive structure improvements, and marketing tactics to both retain and attract new participants. And we're looking forward to this discussion for new ideas.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that, John. And if I could go to the gas DR study real quickly, one of the things under the Con Ed study, you note that the Con Ed study snapback reduced savings by 54%. And I'm wondering if there's any way that you've identified to sort of mitigate this kind of snapback impact.
And in referring to snapback, are you talking to customers using more energy than they would have used without an event?
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily using more energy, but I think my understanding is of snapback is that there's an event, it reduces their consumption, and then there's compensation after the event is over, which maybe doesn't use as much, but in this case, we saw a 54% increase in those snapback, in the snapback impact, which obviously reduces the benefits of the event. And I'm wondering if you've been able to identify any ways to try and either lower that kind of an impact or mitigate that impact in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for the question, Commissioner Plant. I would say traditionally, snapback has been less of a concern because demand response programs haven't been focused on energy savings. They've been focused on, reducing that peak. However, as we, calling a DR event has an impact on participating customers. And so we are constantly trying to find ways to reduce that impact. Some of those ways are pre-cooling, homes on air conditioner control type programs, moderating the amount of drift, the temperature home or the temperature of the home, experiences and those kinds of things. But I think there are interesting ideas, that Con Ed's experiencing if we shift our focus into more both peak reduction and energy savings that we could pursue.
Great. You also reported that Con Ed found that higher setbacks resulted in higher savings, but also higher opt-out rates. And I'm wondering if you found that there was a sweet spot really that to identify maximum participation and also maximum benefit.
At this point, we haven't found that sweet spot by which the majority of the customers find comfort versus value. I would say that customers are different and their tolerances are different. Utilities that utilize their programs quite a bit find that they end up with a core of participants that are very tolerant of those kinds of setbacks. But as you attempt to increase your controllable load, you do run into customers that are less tolerant of those kinds of things. So we haven't solved that issue, is the bottom line.
Okay, thanks. And moving on to the National Grid load shedding program, it seemed to have the best results from your measurement, and I was wondering if that might be one that would offer a good model for a PSCO pilot.
And are you referring to commercial and industrial or residential in your question?
I believe it was the residential. That there's a graph that identified I don't have the report in front of me, but identified the impact of the various different programs that look like load shedding had a really good effect.
There are a couple of things I note from the National Grid perspective. It's a fairly small pilot with 8,600 devices, and I think we've exceeded that, at this point. So that gets into the variety of customers that that we're dealing with. What I do like is that there are performance incentives. So there's an enrollment incentive and then a performance incentive for events and participation that I think are very interesting for our programs.
Yeah, I think that, maybe we could find some sort of a combination there as we were talking about trying to find that sweet spot. I imagine the performance incentive influences that to some extent.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point, out of these workshops. I think a lot of the commenters noted the value, what we can pay, for demand response is a critical piece in what potential, exists beyond what we've gotten already. Yeah.
One of the things in that load shedding, the National Grid load shedding program that seemed sort of counterintuitive to me, is that when they had a, quote unquote emergency event, they had lower participation. That's 50% compared to 86% across the other events. Do you have an understanding of why that was?
Not specifically, with their program. I don't know if they conducted surveys post event, but that would be very informative. The data point, that I can share is, we have the ability to do mandatory events, for our AC rewards program under certain conditions. And we did find that when we did a mandatory event last year, we had pretty low opt-outs, meaning rather folks that requested to be taken off of the program, after that event, which tells me that there is a certain tolerance for being able to do that if used with discretion.
Yeah. And again, maybe it comes down to that level of compensation as well. I don't know if you want to, if you had anything else on the gas DR, but I'm prepared to move on to the general VPP discussion.
No, thank you, sir. We'll stand by for additional questions.
Okay. One of the things that, relative to the other comments that we heard in this proceeding, that I was able to sort of glean out of it was that there's a few different approaches to how you design, a VPP program or, a pilot as we're talking about. One is a direct RFP with VPP providers. Another one is the establishment of a open access market platform, but with limited identified participation from selected VPP providers. Another would be an open access market platform with open participation from any approved VPP provider. And then we also heard about the participation of, cooperative models for VPPs. And I'm wondering what the company's response is to the consideration of these various models and how they might integrate with your strategy.
Sure, I'm happy to take that, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah. Sure.
I think there's a couple of different approaches we've considered, and I'll use our Renewable Battery Connect program as background here. So we launched that program about a year ago or so. That model today is an incentive program. It's based off largely an upfront incentive with a small ongoing $100 per year incentive for performance in the program. We're absolutely interested in evolving that to a program that's larger in scale and one that also potentially rewards customers for more of their actual performance. So I think to your question, we feel that there are some inherent barriers in a vertically integrated market. They're not insurmountable, but in terms of the way we design a potential VPP RFP or a broader VPP program moving forward, what's clear to us is that there needs to be some clear standards across vendors. One of the challenges we have today is that the folks that are managing these programs for us are using separate vendor platforms, specifically tied to the assets that those vendors are putting into the market. So regardless of the different constructs that you volunteer there as potential pathways, I think the key thing for us is, as we think about scale of VPPs, as the entity that's responsible for maintaining the safe, reliable operation of our distribution system, we just need to have a good understanding of how these assets are going to impact our system. When you actually get down to the compensation model, I think there's a lot of flexibility there. But we're also cognizant to ensure that we're not designing programs that are going to be limited in nature, just specific pilots that are one-to-one rather than an opportunity to potentially bring together different vendors and different asset types. So hopefully that answers your question a bit.
Yeah, I think it gets at it. One of the things you mentioned was the Battery Connect. Is that what it's called?
Correct.
Battery Connect program. And one of the other things that we heard from some of the different commenters was that they were encouraging us not to do technology specific programs, but rather oriented towards a certain outcome. Is that what you're kind of getting at there as you're looking at expanding to more performance? It would be more based on a certain outcome, and that might integrate batteries, it might integrate water heaters, a variety of things.
It's a great question. To echo our comments a little bit without repeating them too much, I think it really depends on what problem you're trying to solve with the VPP. That obviously depends whether you're sitting on the load side of the equation, which is more similar to a lot of our traditional demand response offerings. If you're thinking about it in the sense of traditional services that a central plant might be able to provide, it gets a little bit more challenging in terms of being able to create a VPP that's open to all sorts of asset classes. That, in my opinion, is where we'd be looking at more specific requirements around things like discharge duration of batteries, availability, dispatchability, et cetera. So really, it's a difficult question to answer. It's a good one, but I think if we had a little bit more guidance on what problem we were trying to solve here, whether that's a bulk system consideration, whether it's a distribution system constraint, that will allow us to ultimately construct a program that can be successful in meeting that need.
Yeah, that gets to a more sort of fundamental question that I had, which is this idea of the grid, system versus the distribution-based system. When we look at things like, offsetting, maybe the need for a gas peaker plant, we're looking at the impact on the larger, grid event, right? Because the gas peaker is located on a grid, on the bulk system. But when we're looking at maybe increasing the efficiency of a distribution system that's contributing to that peak, we'd be looking more at the distribution side of things. And I'm wondering, for example, for event, scheduling an event, would that be targeted at when that event is most beneficial at the distribution side, which is going to then have a ripple effect onto the bulk system, but it might actually happen more often on the distribution side than it would happen at the bulk system. What is your thinking about that in terms of the relative benefits?
Candidly, that is one of the most challenging and interesting problems to solve when you start thinking about these stacking of benefits. I'd say that some of the organized wholesale markets have been a little bit further ahead for 22. But one of the real concerns we have as the operator of the grid is thinking about and ensuring that if we have assets that are potentially participating in a market, they're not also at the same time creating deleterious impacts on the distribution system in the way they're being dispatched and operated. So it's not really a great answer to your question. I think at the end of the day, it really sort of depends with the program construct at the beginning. The way I think about it, though, is, every VPP is kind of a rectangle, right? And, you can provide a bulk system benefit pretty easily. Whether or not you can layer on top distribution system benefits and sort of be that square inside of the rectangle, I think really just depends upon the nature of what we're solving for in the bulk system, as well as other considerations, such as where those assets may be located, other relevant characteristics of the distribution system. But yeah, it's a challenging and interesting question to answer. So one we're still thinking about quite a bit.
Yeah, and particularly as you're trying to develop what that market structure looks like and what the compensation structure looks like, because, you know, as I said, you may have more events on the distribution side that maybe don't directly relate to, for example, a gas peaker, but could relate to a gas peaker depending on what's happening on other distribution systems. And I'm just wondering, you know, maybe give it a little thought for the, you know, some future some future filings, help us kind of think this through, because I also wonder, you know, as we get more EVs on a distribution system, as we get more distributed generation, more of all of these various different assets, you know, moving into heat pumps and things, how focusing on the efficiency of the distribution system might help us further down the road as we're managing those new loads, and how that the relative benefit is what I'm kind of struggling with.
Yeah, absolutely. And another important consideration for that is that when we look across the industry with other peer utilities that have programs that are effectively VPPs today, including our own on the demand response side, a lot of those programs are being managed in a way that there's not necessarily operational visibility into our distribution system. In other words, those software platforms that may be dispatching events that may be either third party or utility owned, they're not necessarily tied today to our operational control systems like our SCADA platforms and our advanced distribution management system. So just pointing it out, that's another thing as you start to think about potential scalability of VPPs. That's really why it becomes critical to have a tie to that operational view of the system at the more granular distribution level. And
Yeah,
certainly something we're thinking about as we start to develop our own capabilities around DRMS as well as distributed energy resource management systems, or DERMS.
yeah. Hey, I'm sorry, I've gone over with your section here, but I do have a couple more questions if you don't mind. So you talked about the various aspects of VPP, including generation. However, most of your behind the meter generation, if not all of your behind the meter generation now, is net metered. And it's already providing power to the grid. So how do you contemplate the participation of that kind of generation in a VPP? Is it something that shifts with energy storage? Are you thinking there's an inherent incentive for those currently in a net metering arrangement to then add energy storage? And what kind of consumer compensation would it take to drive customer participation in pairing storage with solar so that it has a greater benefit to the utility?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thinking a little bit on the fly here, you know, net metering in Colorado at retail rates already provides a pretty lucrative incentive, especially when it's paired with the time of use rates that we have. Moving forward, we're certainly interested in looking at ways that we can potentially move beyond those time of use blocks and the export value of that energy through a net metering program. It was raised in our renewable energy plan, and the company agreed as part of that settlement to help develop a pay-per-performance pilot specifically around batteries. So we're definitely interested in moving that construct to something that can provide value, not just to the participating customers, which is often the case with net metering, but also broader benefits to the bulk system and potentially even the distribution system. So those are topics we explored a little bit in our last renewable energy plan. I expect it'll also be an important topic to cover in our next plan that really is coming upon us quickly here. As far as the potential structure that might look like, I mean, certainly there's been various adaptations of net metering in states like California. New York's another great example where utilities there have adopted something that tries to align the benefits of those DERs better to the bulk system benefits and the distribution system benefits of specific areas. New York's a really great example of that, where the value, at least for commercial solar, is specifically tied to marginal cost of distribution in part in various aspects of the system. So it's a great question. I don't think we have, you know, a unified response today, but it's certainly something we can get back on in comments.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, mainly what I'm thinking about here is, you know, net metering is, you know, sort of the arrangement that people have right now who are, you know, if not first adopters, second adopters as we've gone, you know, into a matured solar market, and they're the likely first and second adopters of behind the meter storage. So I'm wondering how how we might be able to structure something that would entice those people who are really at the top of the food chain for adding storage to do that. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like.
Absolutely. And one other point I'd make there is that there are some statutory restrictions today, just as far as an eligible energy resource and therefore eligibility for recent incentive funding. So today the batteries, Renewable Battery Connect program, those have to be 100% charged by renewable energy. So in our view, that may be a little bit exclusionary towards other use cases that could be using largely renewable energy being put back on the system, but it may not be 100%. Just another limitation potentially to point out there.
Yeah. I had some other questions, but I think I'll just jump to one that I did have a question about. On page 21, you say that the company does not currently have plans to enable end-to-end technology necessary to support VPPs on its advanced meters. Enabling such technology would require additional work and investment. The company would need time and cost recovery mechanisms to support additional technologies for VPP purposes on the advanced meters. And I'm wondering if you could just discuss that statement a little bit. I don't know if your current AMIs are capable of, for example, remotely downloading software to facilitate VPPs, or what is the nature of the additional work and investment that you're referring to that would enable VPP capability?
Yeah, I may defer that one to my colleague, Chad Nickel, if he's available. And if he's not on for some reason, we can certainly get back to you in written comment. Let me just take a scan here. I don't believe I see him. Yeah, if it's all right by you, Commissioner Platt, I think we can certainly respond to that in written comment.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And that's all I have for now. And I look forward to continuing the conversation, and particularly as we get comments from some of the other participants here. Mr. Mitchell, did you have something else? So next up we have Recurve.
Just a clarification. I'm Tyler Mansfield, but some of Xcel Energy's colleagues had a difficult time logging in, so they use my directory.
Okay.
So they've adopted my name as well.
Okay.
So sorry for the confusion.
And is Tyler Mansfield number 2 here? Did do you have something to add to the comments?
Yeah, I help support our AMI program. So yeah, I can directly answer that question if you like, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, that would be great. And Ms. Best, I'm sorry, we'll get to Recurve in just a moment.
Yep. Yeah, so my name is Chad Nickel, oversee part of our AGIS program. And yeah, what that comment was intended to mean is the meters themselves have the capability to do it. But there's other requirements that we'd have to build that end-to-end technology, which I think could include enabling that tech capability on the meter, but it likely would require other investment in terms of the back office IT side, potentially integrating with like a VPP. So I think theoretically it's possible, but I think there's other requirements and costs that would go into enabling that capability. I mean, I would just think about it from like the standpoint that you'd have to have something that would identify and trigger that event and then send that communication to the meter. And then ultimately the meter would need to communicate with that end device. So, I think certainly possible, but a lot of things that we need to put in place to make it happen.
Okay, great. So what you're talking about is really more of a software or informational sort of back-end capability. It's not that you need to go out and physically change something on, the equipment. Okay, all right.
Yeah, we may need to enable and build something to go specifically on the meter, but yeah, wouldn't have to specifically change out the meter and replace it with a new meter. Yeah, I think that capability exists with the meter, but would require other investment.
Okay, on a not in a physical sense, but in a informational
informational software sense. Yep.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. Okay, Recurve. is best.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Plant. I was
Thank
wondering if it would be okay to take 10 minutes and also share slides.
It's fine by me. I don't have the capability of doing that. Can you do that? Or do you need us to?
Commissioner,
Yeah.
if you just give me a second, I can make her a co-host and then she can do that on her own.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
And sure. And you should be all set, Carmen.
Okay. Let me see. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to illuminate our comments today. My name is Carmen Best, and I'm the Chief Policy Officer at Recurve and author of the comments with my colleague, Kaylee Mangan. To get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about who Recurve is and what we do. We are a software platform that does two key things. We do analytics of energy consumption patterns, either before an intervention to see where they land on a distribution system, or maybe in a community or other parameter that might be important to the program design, and also after interventions to see how well they have performed and what sort of impacts they've delivered both to customers and to the grid. The other thing that we do is we can stand up our analytics and deploy a platform to enable a market-driven virtual power plant or multiple virtual power plants to deliver energy and peak resources to utilities or other load-serving entities. In the VPP and natural gas peak proposals, we highlighted the opportunity to pilot VPPs with this open market model. And in a nutshell, the demand flex market is one example of an open pay for performance marketplace where aggregators or trade allies or VPP providers, they could have various names, could receive incentive payments for saving end customers energy or shifting their usage based on their metered changes in metered energy usage when and where it may be most valuable for the grid or the distribution system. So flex markets can include both energy efficiency and demand response. They can cover electric and gas, or they could be oriented to carbon impacts as well, or integrated versions of those value streams. Measures such as HVAC upgrades, lighting, water heaters are installed, and the savings are tracked at the meter using open source sets of methods, which I'll talk about in a little bit. They can also accommodate managed charging, battery storage, and other active load management strategies as part of a flex market. At the bottom of the stack, the changes in energy consumption are measured and then quantified using the baseline model of historic usage so that utilities and regulators can track that progress over time to the incremental impacts to the grid and for customers. So as we noted in our comments, we see a great opportunity for vertically integrated utilities to procure VPP resources by specifying the value that they would be seeking and then sending that as the price signal to the potential VPP providers or aggregators that are out in the market. Now, the avoided cost curve is a great example of how you could get started setting that price because it illustrates the value of not using energy at a particular time of the day or season of the year. It could be including transmission and distribution, ancillary services, greenhouse gas impacts, and some of these values are time delimited and some might not be. They could be stacked on top of time delimited value. But together, they could provide a signal of the value of changing energy consumption patterns, and it forms the basis of the payment for VPPs or aggregator providers that are delivering this value via their customer relationships. And they have many mechanisms by which they might achieve those outcomes, but they could all be judged on a similar basis. With a wide range of aggregators and VPP for providers, the utility or load serving entity can drive innovation for their customers and give them access to a wider range of solutions that might be meaningful to them. But at the same time, not lose control of how customers' energy usage or their energy production might be affecting the distribution system. So aggregators would be screened and validated by a utility or load serving entity and given in effect a hunting license to provide specific services to customers that would meet minimum requirements that would be set by the utility for safety and things like that. The market manager in this scenario would serve the role of quantifying those changes in energy consumption for payment, and then they can also coordinate other administrative functions like enrolling projects, signing up aggregators and VPPs, and reviewing forecasted estimates, et cetera, to give the utility or load serving entity greater visibility to how these projects might be performing on the system. Now, the market manager is typically paid out of a proportion of the value of projects. So the cost included in this sort of model could be controlled based on the scale of the market. So if it's working, you can put more funds in. If it's not working, you can be scaling back. And since it's paid on performance, it presents little to no risk to ratepayers because they would be in effect paying for the system value that they're getting collectively. On the point of
if I could just jump in here real quickly, if you could go back to that previous slide. In this scenario, obviously PSCO is the utility we're talking about. Is Recurve, your role is as market manager? Is that correct? Or
if Recurve was so lucky to be in that role with the company, we would be happy to play that role. That is the role that we've had with other vertically integrated utilities, to be a market manager. Mm-hmm.
So you guys serve as a market manager, and so in our case we're looking at RFP structure, and in this particular structure that you're presenting here, an RFP that the utility would be putting out onto the market would be for a market manager, not necessarily for a VPP provider. It would be more the platform that they would be doing an RFP for. Yep. And that platform would then include all of the various market components and I guess the financial arrangements with the VPP providers, but the VPP providers would then have a separate arrangement with customers. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Yes. So there is an RFP out in the market right now that I could probably put in my formal comments that would give an example of how this is being bid out for a vertically integrated utility. But in effect, yes, they're hiring the platform manager, the market manager. They have independent relationships or contracts with the VPP providers or the aggregators that would be out in the market. And then since it's open, those aggregators are the ones that are they have direct relationships with customers to settle on both the price and the solutions that they would be installing on their site. And that, of course, would have to be tied to any, if there's safety and other considerations that the utility needs to make sure are happening, then those are typically passed through to the aggregator relationships as well.
Okay. And then any M&V would take the aggregated data that comes through the market manager, and then that would be the M&V that would be reported to the utility. Is that correct?
Right. Yep. Okay. And there are a few roles that a market manager could play. One could be forecasting where the best opportunities are for deploying different types of VPPs, and then go out and find help bring in VPP providers that could offer those types of services. It could be that the market manager helps design the appropriate price that's aligned with the avoided costs for the utility. So they could play that role of a little bit more of the design of the operations of the flex market. We call it a flex market, but of the open market solution. And then typically they're also doing the measurement and verification. And they have an audit trail that aligns with the payment structure in their contracts with the aggregators. So everyone has transparency to who got paid what, where, and when. And then if you wanted to know how aggregators settled with customers, that could also be information that's available. But typically that's left to aggregators to settle with customers.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no problem. Happy to illuminate. So onto the measurement and verification component, we highlighted this quite a bit in our comments, so everyone could see kind of the framework from which we're doing this. Open source advanced M&V is a really important piece of the solution, because having a common open source method and this code base, not just a method, but how you actually execute the method, that anyone in the system, from aggregators to utilities to regulators, can consistently and reliably repeat and reproduce those calculations, is really essential for understanding that common lens of performance. And it needs to be available without a restrictive license. If that information is proprietary, it makes it very difficult to run it as a market. The OpenEE meter is an example of an open source method and code base that's been used in this sort of flex market model. It has been available since 2016, and it's curated by the Linux Foundation Energy. And anyone can participate in contributing to its improvement by contributing code, collaborating in technical working groups, or just calling out bugs. It is a weather normalized pre-post calculation that I won't go into a ton of detail on that, but it's based on industry standard practice, and we put a lot more details of the origins in our written comments. I also wanted to note that in our comments, there's an opportunity to be able to deploy VPPs that can provide both that long-term load modifying or base load VPP, as well as the net peaking VPPs from managed and event-based response. And we can and are deploying these methods or these approaches together, and we can actually use the same open source methods with different variants of the time frame that we're doing the measurement, to give that collective value of being able to dispatch things more regularly, and also be able to not lose the value of efficiency when you're doing demand response, because it conflates the baseline. So let me, if you'll bear with me, I'll share a few squiggly lines here. This is effectively how the calculation would work. We start with the historical consumption pattern for a customer. All of this is calculated at the customer level. And then envision a flex market or a flex project. So the installation of an HVAC system might be one example. You're looking at what the energy consumption pattern would look like if nothing had happened. And then you're looking at the actual change in that energy consumption. That would be the bottom line. So imagine that they had less usage after the installation of that technology. And the difference between those two is your energy savings, or your avoided energy use is the technical term. And then imagine as that project is going along, you've also enrolled this HVAC system in a event-based program or an event-based opportunity. Maybe later in the year, you're going to have an event called, and then you would quantify the incremental impact from responding to event off the efficiency baseline, not the pre-existing baseline. And this gives you the ability to be able to capture both streams in that program, and like was noted earlier, be able to deploy these solutions on a more frequent basis and even on a continuous basis, and capture the value of that active load management that we're seeing is more and more important to managing the grid or the distribution system impacts in the shorter term. So this is one example of how we're doing this, and there should be some more reports coming out. I don't know if they'll be available for us to submit in our written comments on this webinar, but we'll definitely keep folks apprised as those are released. Another note that I included in our comments was how quickly this solution could potentially be launched. While results may vary, the key factors are to have some urgency about getting the resources on the grid or achieving these load reductions or GHG goals. The other key conditions are deciding on that price signal that aligns with the utility needs or the load serving entity needs, and then establish those necessary agreements with aggregators. We have an off-the-shelf version of that can be deployed very quickly. And of course, setting up the basic data flows, secure data flows that are just energy consumption patterns, it's not an onboard calculation or anything like that with the AMI. So by way of example, I just wanted to note that we did launch the Flex Market solution within 6 months. That was exceptionally fast from the authorization of the California Public Utilities Commission a couple years ago. And the steady pipeline has warranted extension of that funding by that agency twice in the last year. And it's now required as a path for all utilities in the state. So Colorado, I think, shares a rich environment of aggregators and VPP service providers that will be ready to engage in this type of solution and could really augment the existing portfolio of solutions that Xcel has already invested in. And even though in this instance, it was a governor's order and the commission direction motivated the action, I think the model could just as easily be championed within a utility to procure these energy resources. And finally, wanted to note that this model delivered. Over 1 year of implementation, we saw the program's impacts escalate rapidly to deliver roughly $44.7 million in system benefit. Now that's inclusive of the GHG impacts, transmission, distribution, et cetera, all those avoided costs. And it also delivered about 50% more system benefits to California above and beyond their existing commercial portfolio. So it was intended to be incremental to existing activities, and it indeed provided significant incremental benefits. And for each kilowatt hour that was saved, it had double the grid impacts because the price signal was aimed at that peak period. It was implemented with a wide variety of aggregators and VPP services, including load management, EV managed charging, battery storage, and HVAC lighting and refrigeration upgrades. So to wrap up, animating VPPs in Colorado, I think is going to be a no regrets investment to find greater parity with valuing supply and demand resources. And I hope that our comments in this proceeding were helpful and informative. And of course, we're open to questions and any follow-ups to help clarify and appropriately adapt the solution to the Colorado context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Best. I appreciate that, and maybe you can submit the slide deck for the record in this proceeding. That'd be great. So one of the things I wanted to just follow up with you on your comments was on page 3 in your discussion of the data requirements. You mentioned that those were the data requirements that required in California. And as I understand, that project's now been operational for a while. Does the list there hold up? Did you learn anything? Are there aspects you didn't expect to need, or some that you thought would be needed that weren't actually necessary? And are there components that are specifically required for engaging VPP aggregators? And then what components are driven by the M&B requirements?
Right, that's a great question. That list that we provided is basically the core data that is needed to run our type of solution, because it's grounded in the consumption data, the hourly consumption data. It was also in an energy efficiency proceeding. So if you wanted to incorporate ancillary services or shorter time valued ramping, things like that, none of that information was obviously provided. So those might be other things that one would need to understand to be able to make a reasonable response. But yeah, effectively, there are 4 key pieces of information that we need to run this VPP, and that is when the project happened, where the project happened, and if the when is an event, then it's just the time version of the event. Typically 12 months of energy consumption before the intervention and 12 months after the intervention. and a shorter time period, obviously, for demand response. I think it's more like a month pre and post. So it's effectively any additional information like that can enhance the virtual power plant to make sure that it's getting to the places in the distribution system where it's going to deliver the most value. If you want to include equity metrics like disadvantaged communities and add value for those sorts of interventions, maybe an adder or something like that, then that information would obviously need to be included as well. But effectively, no, that I think that list has held up pretty well when it can be provided on a consistent basis. And we typically do that in partnership with the utilities to frame out what the parameters are, and then we set up secure data flow.
Okay. It's best, I think, frozen. Still looks like maybe the connection. Oh,
Yep.
You're back.
Sorry. It just
Okay.
for a second. Did you hear my answer though?
I did.
Or did it
I
get
think
lost?
I heard.
Okay.
I think I heard the bulk of it.
Okay.
So when you're creating a market platform, which is obviously a big part of the service that you do, the avoided costs are obvious, a major driver. So does the current DSP process with PSCo provide the necessary information for establishing that kind of a market price? Are your prices driven by an overall system value? We were talking about this with the company. Is it based on sort of the bulk system value, or is there a specific distribution system value? How do you sort of come about calculating those different values?
Well, you can do it any way you want to. And I don't mean to sound evasive that this is such a flexible solution, but indeed we have been using marginal spot prices can be a version of the lights just went out in the office that I'm in. You can use a marginal price signal, maybe from an ISO or a regional energy market. That could be the price signal. In the case of the one that I was showing the results for, since it was funded under an energy efficiency emergency proceeding, they use the energy efficiency avoided cost, which the Excel has in their proceeding as well, in the strategic issues that gets decided. And then it was they allowed folks to modify it to respond to the summer reliability concerns. So effectively, we moved some of the value from those non-peaking days into the peaking hours, and then it still had to balance out across the whole system benefit. So I think it's really flexible, and it depends on, like the gentleman was saying earlier, it depends on what problem you want to solve. So your price signal should be looking like the inverse of the problem that you want to solve. And then as resources are coming on board, then they're going to be solving that problem by going out and capturing that value from the market.
Okay.
Yep.
On page 6 of your comments, you discussed starting with a simple price taker model, I think you call it, that could then expand to a more mature pricing structure over time. And recognizing we're in the midst of a shift to electrification, both home transportation as well as expansion of storage technologies, how might that be structured to both facilitate the transition and prepare the market for a more mature model down the road? Is there a phased in approach that you would suggest as we're entering into this pilot?
Yeah. One of the reasons that we like the price taker model in the early stages is we have run other marketplaces where there were two things that kind of were its Achilles heel. One was that it wasn't an open market. So they did an RFP and they chose like 2 vendors. And then once those vendors were chosen, the load serving entity or the program administrator, those were the eggs in their basket. And maybe they went out of business or other things happened and they weren't able to deliver on those resources. That's going to happen. But the open market model helps you diversify against that risk. So we really like the open market model to allow as many aggregators to come in as possible. The other thing that happened in some of our early versions of this were that we had a bid-in model. And since aggregators didn't really have good visibility to their performance because they hadn't iterated enough, they underbid and they were losing money and then couldn't survive. So in this model, it's the price taker model. You could also look at it as, the utility's willingness to pay for these resources, or in the case of California, it's really the state's willingness to pay for those resources or those emergency resources. And that allows aggregators to come in with lower risk to they're still on the hook for risk of performance, but they're not on the hook for risk of non-performance, but for not getting paid. And they also don't have to try to guess about what their bid price would be. They can go out and do projects that are going to be cash positive, or that they think will be, and then mitigate that risk across their portfolio, learn a lot. And then in future bids, in future situations, it might make sense to have an auction or some other mechanism as they get more familiar with what sort of resources they can deliver with those sorts of curves. We are seeing aggregators coming in with realization rates that are close to 100%. So that's a good sign that they're understanding how they can forecast their impacts and might be ready to shift to more of a bid-in model.
Okay. And getting to this sort of platform versus aggregator model, as your platforms are technology and aggregator neutral, are there customer engagement applications that stem from the platform provider as opposed to the individual VP provider, or does direct engagement and participation information come from the platform provider, the utility, the VPP, the technology?
Right.
How is that engagement best managed, and how is it best standardized, I guess?
Yeah, great question. We do not have a customer facing. Our customers are aggregators effectively, and utilities or program administrators, whoever's sponsoring the market, or regulators or state agencies. So there isn't any flow through of our intel or data or anything that's going directly to customers. However, aggregators and VPP providers are typically deploying their own solutions, and then they can either, in some cases, they need to tie into data streams to be able to operationalize their system. So in certain cases, we can help enable that with clean data streams. That's not as common yet. It's more common to see them more on a project by project basis once they have customer authorization to see the data, to ideate around solutions that are going to work for that customer. And then when results start coming in, they might use that and share it with the customer to say, hey, look how this went. And if they have a kind of a performance agreement with the customer, which it's up to them if they want to have that or not, then they might use that information to show them how they performed or what sorts of modifications they might want to use or change. But our platform is really designed around being the settlement platform between aggregators in the market and regulators or market sponsors.
Okay, great. One last question, and it has to do with the sort of pre-approval of the market participants, the VPP aggregators. You mentioned in your comments, I think on page 11, they must have a business license, agree to terms and conditions. Public services expressed a strong concern over potential cyber criminals and cybercrime as they get access. Are there standards for ensuring a level of cybersecurity in market participants that already exists, or something that could be tapped into?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the dimension of cybersecurity. And I apologize that I haven't looked at those comments in enough detail, but two places where the cybersecurity protections come in. One is obviously in our data security agreements with the utility. We would have all of it would we would meet their threshold of security to be able to handle that data at all as their partner or as their vendor. So we have SOC 2 audits as just one component of it, and then any other cybersecurity requirements that might come with that. Typically in those agreements as well, there's stipulations around how we can share data with aggregators or not. And in some cases, you can only share it with aggregators based on the customer via customer authorization. In other situations, they're willing to do targeting and have a controlled pathway to reach out to customers when they know that they're going to be a good candidate for something. But those can kind of be designed and set up by the utility as they set up the market rules, et cetera. And then we pass those requirements through in our what we call the flexibility purchase agreement. When we have an agreement with an aggregator, it mirrors the expectations that we're under with the utility that we pass on to those aggregators. So in terms of cybersecurity of aggregators or VPP providers, it's typically a flow down from us. I don't know if there's a concern that it's going to create other, with customer cited devices, if they present a particular security risk to kind of make their way back into the system, that I don't necessarily have any comments or protections to offer on that right now. I think typically our system is really just looking at consumption data. So there's no direct connection to the utilities SCADA system or operational controls or anything like that would pose any cybersecurity risk of taking down the system or anything.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Besta. I appreciate the presentation and you taking the time to participate. And I encourage you to continue your participation in the proceeding as it goes forward.
Thank you. I will note that I may have to leave early today, though. So thank you. Okay. I will watch it online. Thanks for recording it.
All right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. Okay, next up we have ZNE Alliance and Sirius Controls.
Yeah, this is Richard Chorsky. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. Can I also share my screen?
Yep. Somebody knows.
Just give me 1 second. Thank you. Hold on. Thanks. Okay, should be good.
One second. Okay, I want to first of all acknowledge my colleague, Mark Lane of Sirius Controls, who's going to co-present with me on the more technical aspects of the VPP solutions that we are working together with Sirius Controls to deploy here in California, and we hope soon in Colorado. By way of background, Zero Net Energy Alliance is a nonprofit organization. We've been around for about a decade now, working to decarbonize energy, transportation, and buildings. And our fundamental mission is to do that at the most accelerated rate possible through deployment of advanced energy communities, which is a construct that you may have heard of through EPRI or the California Energy Commission. And effectively, it's all about VPPs and DER aggregations and integrated approaches to transportation and building decarbonization. So our goals as an organization are to partner with communities and utilities. Thus far, primarily we work with public utilities, community choice, and cooperative utilities, although we also enjoy good relationships with IOUs. And we're looking to accelerate their transition to 100% renewable and carbon-free electricity, reduce customer costs, increase resilience, optimize the value of DERs, accelerate transportation and building electrification, and maximize community benefit by relocalizing the energy and fuel spend. So as we define advanced energy communities, we're looking at the 4D model, as we say, the decarbonized, distributed, digitized, and democratized energy system. And that includes community deployed VPPs, DER aggregations, and microgrids that can be developed and managed at the community level. And here in California, that's been a subject of a lot of regulatory proceedings and work to really enable community aggregation to be a thing, and to enable community microgrids and community VPPs to be deployed between customers and the distribution system operator and the ISO, either in partnership with community energy operators or potentially by cities and other public agencies, or even prosumer cooperatives. So we view this matter of control of the aggregation approach and of the VPP or the DERMS to be really crucial for value capture and value optimization from a consumer and a community perspective. And that's where the role of a progressive regulator like the Colorado PUC is so absolutely crucial to this. And frankly, also the progressive approach of the IOU or the distribution system operator as well. Another really crucial aspect of our strategy has to do with trying to accelerate the market for V2G enabled vehicles and charging infrastructure, which, as everyone knows, are really technically here now. A number of light duty manufacturers have V2G enabled vehicles, and more medium and heavy duty manufacturers. However, there has not been a real focus on V2G integration in the context of utility programs, VPPs and DERMS, that at the pace that I think is now feasible given the technical and communication standards work that has really proceeded very rapidly in the last year or so in particular. So in California, we have a bill pending for requiring V2G enabled vehicles and chargers as soon as 2030. Wasn't signed this year, but it may come back, will come back next year. And we hope that sends a signal nationally that V2G programs and technologies are ready for rapid deployment, presumably in concert with VPPs. So just very briefly, we have advanced energy community initiatives with two of the leading community choice energy providers in the state. The first and one of the largest is in the Bay Area, known as MCE Clean Energy. We're deploying VPP and DER aggregations there. Likewise, in Los Angeles County with the city of Lancaster and a CCA collaborative known as CalChoice Energy, involves about half a dozen cities over 2 counties. These are all supported by a California Energy Commission funding, as well as local ratepayer and match funding. So we're really pioneering something that is, I think, important to nationally, which is an open source VPP software platform. It's ADR 2.0B compliant. It's focused on a very non-restrictive, low-cost license that'll be available to any public utility, community, cooperative, et cetera. And the focus there is to prevent, the walled garden approach that I think we're familiar with, the vendor lock-in that many well-known vendors tend to prefer for reasons, frankly, of simple profit motive and for customer capture. So we are trying to push back on that by providing a platform that is much more open, much more economic to own and operate, and much more flexible. We're also supporting a new collaborative development here in Colorado, known as the Colorado Renewable Energy Cooperative. And there the focus is on trying to get and empower prosumers to actually deploy their own VPP platform and their own DERMS platform, and enable prosumers as a group to enter into bilateral contracts with local LSEs, whatever the market structure or ownership structure may be. We think that with the advent of cheaper storage, cheaper solar, cheaper V2G vehicles, that soon prosumers will have a set of resources that, if they can harvest them and manage them in a cooperative framework, they can enhance the value proposition for DERS overall, accelerate adoption, cut out finance middlemen, cut out DER middlemen, and we know that solar is half the cost in other countries, mostly having to do with cutting out finance and sales middlemen. We know that VPPs have become a dominant modus operandi in European energy systems, thanks to a larger focus on nonprofit and public ownership models. And we believe that we can catch up in states like Colorado that have a history and a culture of support for cooperative and public utilities, working in harmony with regulators and as appropriate with investor-owned utilities and DSOs. So we think there's a lot of headroom for some very smart and creative approaches there. And last but not least, we have a separate e-fleet accelerator approach, working with a number of solution providers, public agencies, and so forth to try and integrate the deployment of the vehicles and the utility programs necessary to recognize the substantial value that can be created there. So, and this is my last slide, but just some key inputs to this particular proceeding. Our observation in California is that private for-profit aggregators are harvesting the most profitable customers in a given utility territory and are limiting thereby the economic and resilience benefits that could otherwise be shared with customers, ratepayers, and local communities if there was frankly a better regulated marketplace. In some instances, those platform providers, if you will, are bidding capacity into wholesale markets in ways that can be adverse to local LSEs, DSOs, or the ISO. So we think this is a very problematic trend, and it's one that's well advanced, unfortunately, but it can be nipped in the bud by some creative regulation that limits how private aggregators play in a heterogeneous marketplace. So with respect to the Colorado pilot approach, we really believe that the local communities and cooperatives should be supported to deploy VPPs, with IOUs as appropriate to demonstrate the efficacy of a prosumer-focused business model. We believe that the private VPP operators should be strictly regulated to ensure public benefit and transparent operations. And we believe that differential incentives should be supported to encourage V2G-enabled vehicles and infrastructure deployment. To state the obvious, we're in a race against time to decarbonize transportation energy. And right now we are, frankly, gold plating the grid with respect to centralized battery storage. And it's costing consumers and ratepayers a lot of money. We really urgently need to reduce the storage cost to bring on more renewables, and centralized storage is just not economic compared to vehicle-based storage. The numbers that I'm sure you've seen are, somewhere around $400 a kilowatt hour for central storage. And thanks to battery economies of scale in vehicles, it's much closer to $100 a kilowatt hour for vehicles. Of course, only a portion of the battery is available at any one time, only a portion of the vehicle. But still, the studies that are numerous now in pilot programs, including for that matter in Boulder, show that we're talking a couple $100 a month easily for a light duty vehicle to be earned through ancillary services, TOU, shift, and so forth in a DERMS or VPP construct for V2G enabled vehicles, and much more, as much as $10,000 to $15,000 a year for a school bus, for example, is being demonstrated also in Colorado. So there's a lot of value locked up in those vehicles, and they can and should be unlocked by VPPs and appropriate programs to incent those V2G vehicles within the VPP program context. And then last but not least, I'm sure this is in the view in the line of sight of most stakeholders, which is that there some of the larger VPP values that you see referenced in studies like the Brattle Group or a similar one by Stanford, looking at VPP value are, a little bit speculative right now as it relates specifically to avoided costs, things like deferred distribution, upgrade costs, capacity, or RA value, and so on. Those are really important values that need a third-party analysis and validation. So whatever we do on the VPP front, I think the participation of groups like NREL or Colorado State University Energy Institute, those type of organizations should be encouraged so that we really nail down those values and get them reflected in our incentives and our rate structure. So thank you very much. That's just pardon the rapid fire delivery, but we only had a few minutes, so I want to pass the baton to my colleague, Mark Lane.
Great, thanks, Richard. Can I share my screen too?
Yes, just let me change that over. Hold on 1 second.
Sure.
Okay,
Even
you
though
should
I
be good.
talk, great.
You
Even
should be
though I
good.
talk mostly and don't really follow my own slides, let me try. So to follow up, Richard and I work very close together. We are two separate companies, but we do work very close together on the projects that he was discussing. If you think of Sirius Controls, we're kind of the doers of the whole VPP process. One of the things that we do is we build a DERMS platform. It encompasses M&V, dispatch, a lot of the tools, the use cases that are being executed. Our DERMS platform is actually what the CCAs use in their back office in order to dispatch all the DERs and the items in the field. When we look at the way we deploy our DERMS, it's a little different than probably most business models because we're not a SaaS platform. You're not coming to us and buying a service from us, and then we're charging you on an ongoing basis to maintain that. When we deploy our DERMS, we typically do it, and Tom, this gets back to one of your questions on IT earlier. We deploy it within the CCA, the co-op, the municipality, the IOUs. We deploy in their data lake and really become a component of their energy stack and present ourselves within their organization as a tool that the DERs then connect to directly. When we do this kind of model, what we're really trying to do is avoid stranded assets where things are installed in the field, like a DER, a battery, and then there's a SaaS in between you and that device in the field. And that SaaS platform, if that company goes away or there's an issue, you lose that connectivity to the DERs. We like to really license our DERMS platform directly to the VPP beneficiary so that they have control over that and they can manage it both from a security perspective, just like you mentioned, Tom, or from the perspective of integration to their data lake to get the information from the DERMS. Chad mentioned something earlier too from Excel about the AMI information, and that's something that we've really, he's spot on. Everything Chad said, spot on. I mean, it's a challenge for everybody getting the meter information into the data lake and then extrapolate from the data lake, run your measurement verification, some of the things that Recurve was talking about, getting that information from the field, from that meter, and especially if we're doing some kind of arbitrage with a battery and we're getting information directly from the battery, and then we're layering in a lot of other things on top of it, like say a smart thermostat or building controls and some of those type of items. That's one of the things that, when we look at our VPP design, that we've integrated tools to really go out and get that AMI meter data, bring it into our environment, run some of the M&V, like Recurve talked about, whether that's, the Caltrack method she mentioned with the OpenEE meter, or it's a 10 and 10 CBL, a 5 and 10. Our VPP, our DERMS platform runs all these things simultaneously, or you can select the best fit based on the type of asset or the type of customer associated. And I think when you look at kind of our comments and our response, they come from the perspective of, again, we're kind of that guy that goes from the DERMS level all the way down to dealing with that homeowner and generating the contract and hiring the contractors to install the DER, and then making that connectivity from the DER all the way up to the DERMS, and then integrating that DERMS into the data lake of the IOU, the co-op, or whoever is going to, need to use that information. Also generating the settlements, during that, using the AMI data, running the M&V, and then generating the settlements. So when we look at it, we really start from the very beginning and say, okay, what are the use cases? What are we targeting here with the VPP? And really, what's the value proposition? And we kind of work backwards from there to say, once we understand what the value proposition is, and what are we targeting capacity? Are we, like some of the things that's been mentioned, are we trying to deal with congestion? Are we in a regulation situation? Once we determine all the use cases of what we're going to control, then we start selecting the type of assets and things in the field that work best with that use case. For example, a battery is really great, but it has a discharge rate, number of kilowatts it can discharge per hour, may work really well in the capacity market, but maybe it doesn't work for us in the frequency market, or in, say, we can use it in congestion, but then we've got building automation that, in a supermarket chain, they can, dump a megawatt of refrigeration at the click of a button, and it's all cold storage. So what we really like to do is we like to develop the tariff, the customer contracts, work closely with the IOU or the, whoever the beneficiary is of it, license our DERMS to them, and really then bring to bear the type of DERs and the types of assets required to meet the use case that we're targeting. So we do a lot of work up front, really with the entire VPP design, from the rules, the structure, the customer contract, all the way down to what is it in the field that we're controlling and what type of customers best fit that. Then we roll into more of an implementation phase, where we work with the customers getting the contract signed, the engagement, all the customer facing piece of the equation. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't make a VPP if we don't have customers allow us to load, shift, shake, and shimmy their load, right? So the way we engage with the customer, making sure the customer has a good experience, the contractors we bring in to do the DER installations or the recommissioning of existing DERs, we find all those types of things, are crucial to the success of the VPP. If we don't end up with customers who are happy at the end and willing to let us, shift their load, we find that the VPP over time starts losing, the effectiveness of how much we can, how much we can shed. We have so many megawatts we're forecasting. Well, we got customers to opt out. So we spend a lot of time really with that customer engagement and making sure that, the customer, understands this being communicated, the events are being communicated to him, and that we're working around kind of what he's willing to do, let's say, and allowing us to, shift and shed his load. And then really from the implementation phase, we roll into more of the longevity, from a VPP perspective. I hear it all the time from other, DERMS providers that, we did a thermostat program. We installed 20,000 thermostats, and a year later, we have about half of them that are responding. And then over a period of 5 years, it just gets worse and worse. And I think it's been mentioned here by everybody that, a lot of the DR stuff that we've all done in the past for just demand response really translates well into VPP. The difference being is that, when we really think of VPP, we start expanding a lot of the things that we're controlling. And even when you look at a battery, a battery has so many kilowatt hours of usage. But when we combine that with, say, a building automation system or water heater control or heat pump control, using these things, doing these measures simultaneously really gives us a much longer duration and more bang for the buck out of our battery. So that's some of the strategy we look at, and our DERMS does when we communicate from our DERMS to the asset level. We're looking at all the operational characteristics, what is available, what the time parameters available, how long we can shed, what is the amount we can get in a given time, is there a recovery time between events? I've done work with probably every major retailer in the US, and it's amazing Some of them will let you do anything you want with their building controls. You can take us down for 6 hours. You can offset temperatures. You can do this. And others, if you move us 2 degrees, our customers go running out of the store. Or, in the case of electrification of homes, we go into a home and we start swapping out natural gas appliance. Well, it's not always just an obvious slam dunk. Sometimes when you look at, someone's usage of a gas stove and you compare it to an induction range, and you have someone who says, hey, we go out to eat all the time. We don't cook at home. And it's like, all right, well, this is a no-brainer. You only use your stove 4 or 5 times during the week. We can do electrification, eliminate that natural gas appliance and put in a nice induction range. And we're going to see, a significant savings for you. Whereas if someone's cooking at home all the time, that induction range can be kind of costly. So sometimes you have to come up with other solutions for them based on that electrification. I think, as we look at that long-term view, one of the things that we really focus on is providing all those resources to track all the assets in the field, how they're being used, when they're available, and then factoring that into our use cases. And when we do that, what we end up with is really a full vertical integration from the DERMS interacting with the data lake of the IOU or the co-op or the municipality, providing a constant stream of what's available, what customers' loads are available at certain times, and then post-event, who performed, what's the settlements, what's the bill credits, and providing that through the DERMS, upstream so that the customers get, the incentives and the things they expect. But then also really going downstream to matching the assets to the correct, type of program and type of use case. So I know
if I could ask you real quickly, just so that I can get a sense of sort of where Sirius Controls fits into this, sort of continuum. I think it's best with Recurve had the utility, the market platform, the VPP aggregator that intersects with the consumer. It sounds like you're doing a lot of the work in the VPP directly working with the consumer. Do you then also provide a platform that intersects with the utility, or do you layer on top, or where do you fit in that?
No, you just nailed it, Tom. We work very closely with the consumers all the way up to providing that DERMS platform. It's a software platform that is ours that we license to the utility for perpetuity so that they own it. And then at that point, that platform is the tool that dispatches all these consumer level DERs in the field. So we really own that entire chain from the DERMS all the way down to the consumer level, selecting DERs, working with the DERs, selecting contractors. So we kind of do it soup to nuts, really, from the DERMS down. But I think the key thing that I like to kind of point out again is that DERMS that we develop and that does the management of the DERs, the dispatching of the VPP, the settlements in the VPP, and all the customer facing components of the VPP like opt-outs, notifications, all that resides within our DERMS that we provide to the utility.
Okay. All right. So it's kind of a one-stop shop here directly with the utility to the consumer. And whereas what Recurve was describing was sort of a two-stop shop. It was the platform and then the aggregators. Okay, gotcha.
That's right. That's right. And of course we do it kind of on on a ad hoc basis. I mean, if like when we work with CCAs and all, there's a lot of communication that they put out from a marketing perspective, directly from their account managers to their customers. It all comes from them. It's not coming from Sirius Controls. We are more of call it a VPP in a box that we will fill whatever roles are required to make the VPP, implement it, come up with the benefit of the VPP. What are the payments? What are the customer contracts? What are the customer incentives? We work closely with utility to help design that. And then as needed, a lot of times what they'll do is, they'll do the initial outreach. And then as the leads go from, a customer who is just responding to a customer who wants to move forward, then that's when it comes to us and we kind of take over with the technical aspect of it, of actually implementing, the measure in the field and then communicating that to the DERMs, and getting it in, actually integrating the DERMs.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Sure.
And you mentioned that, you go in and install the equipment and sign people up for the programs, et cetera. Do you also have a way of taking existing equipment, and engaging it into a program as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you look at like kind of bring your own DER type products, I mean, it's a VPP, the DERMS, that distributed energy resource management software, at the end of the day, it's going to be a software platform and it has to communicate to something in the field. And that something in the field, whether it's a battery, a solar inverter, a building automation, a thermostat, whatever, has to have that ability to talk to the DERMS, so the DERMS can get certain information from it. And that's one of the things that we really do really well, is bridging that information from legacy type products all the way up to more current, stuff that we see being, moved out in the marketplace today. It's taking those existing assets and the current assets, bring them into a common interface, which is our DERMS, and presenting that to a utility as megawatts and kilowatts available for dispatch. We take all that noise in the field, now that disaggregated information, and just really make it transparent to the utility. So from their perspective, the VPP looks like load, something they can dispatch.
And in order to do that, that requires a consumer site visit to install communications equipment that would then intersect with. Okay.
In a lot of the times, I mean, sometimes it doesn't. If customers have something they've purchased over the past few years, or it is already connected to a SaaS platform of a supplier, we can make that integration to the supplier's platform. And we've done that in a lot of cases, like with LG, Duracell, and some of these guys, to where, an existing asset can come right in. It's when we get into like a lot of commercial industrial type applications where we have to do the site visits and kind of deal maybe with old legacy stuff.
Okay.
If I might interject on this one, Tom, one of the reasons why we think it's important to have entities like Sirius in the mix with the business model that they do have is that when you look at the challenge of a VPP, it's multi-leveled. It's there's technical challenges that have to do with the back office of the utility and the data integrations and the billing and everything like that, which are very considerable. And then there's customer acquisition, like how you're going to sell the new DERs, and that's fairly considerable. And then there's the DER integration of the existing DERs to the DERMS and the VPP, and that's considerable. And utilities typically are good at maybe one or two of those things, but rarely all three of them. Just any organization is not typically good at all three of those very different things. And what we discovered was that when you go out and you kind of let the marketplace provide the DERs and integrate the DERs, what you have is these rather restrictive contracts that, famous companies that we need not quote here, have these very restrictive contracts where they basically said, if we're going to deploy a battery, we want to have full control over that battery, or a very restrictive control over that battery that limits the degree to which the LSC can use that for customer benefit. And it is pretty challenging. So to optimize a DER aggregation or a VPP under those circumstances. So what we'd like to see happen is a better integrated trade ally network that's managed, with stronger control vis-a-vis the sponsoring LSC who's providing the incentive, and rely less on companies that may be selling, integrated solar and storage solutions and acting as their own DER aggregator. That's where you get into situations where market forces are kind of, diverging from optimized customer and grid benefit in many cases. So by kind of like pulling that business relationship apart and putting it back together again with a customer agreement that allows for more flexible and customer centric and and grid-centric operating benefit, you really end up with a better result versus a kind of a free-for-all approach where you've got effectively vendor aggregation running, one kind of storage system and another in a solar storage configuration and another in a thermostat configuration. And, all of a sudden as the LSE, you're looking at these very restrictive contracts that just don't integrate and play nicely together. So yeah, we think this is a big deal.
Okay, well, thank you both very much for the presentation. And as I said with Recurve, if you can submit your decks as a part of the record, that would be really helpful. And I encourage you to continue your participation in the proceeding as we go forward.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, Mr. Murray.
Yes, hi, Commissioner Plant. I was scheduled to go, I believe, after COSA and Sunrun. I actually have another commitment though at the top of the hour, and I was just wondering if we might be able to rearrange.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I know we're going a little over. I apologize to everybody for that. I have to say though, I'm getting an awful lot out of this. So
I'm enjoying it. I wish I could stay longer myself.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate the thoroughness and the discussion. But so you are with is it Mission Data? Is that the full name, or is it just Mission or
Mission Data Coalition? Yep.
Coalition. Okay, great.
Yep. And apologies, apologies to my friends at COSA and Sunrun. I'm not trying to steal your thunder. I just have something I can't move at the top of the hour. So
no worries. No worries.
So we're a nonprofit organization that is the primary advocate for customer data portability in the energy sector. And so this is the ability to take the data that is very personal about the customer, reflective of their choices, things they do inside their home and their business, whether that's electric usage data, billing data, account information, et cetera, and take that out of the incumbent and access competitive products and services from elsewhere in the market. And so our comments, focused predominantly on the data aspects of the pilot programs, which of course were several questions in the request. So I want to just quickly make 4 points, sort of partially in reaction to what we've heard earlier today, but also just to emphasize some best practices that we've seen in other jurisdictions. The first point is that, from a VPP perspective, the monopoly utility in our view, really should not be the VPP provider by default. If they want to earn that business, I think it'd be great for them to compete on a level playing field with all the other market actors. But the virtual power plant by itself is not really part of the sort of traditional monopoly service, and so it would be a shame for innovation and creativity for the utility to just be presumed to have that ability to provide all of those products and services when it could be done better with private capital being brought to bear. And this leads to my second point. I believe the company had mentioned that it would need to make back office IT investments in order to actuate or trigger VPPs using the advanced metering system. And this is something that we've been involved in many advanced metering dockets, both in Colorado and across the country. I think the commission should proceed very cautiously with actuating VPPs on the AMI network, because the AMI network is exclusively under PSCo's control. And so if they are the ones that have that trigger capability, it means that you would probably be excluding a lot of other options from participation in that market. It's also unnecessary because we have the internet, we have pretty ubiquitous home broadband, things like that, and so there just isn't that much of a need to use the advanced metering system for actuating sending control signals to users, that type of thing. Even behavioral demand response measures are, basically using mobile devices, and the subsequent settlement is done off of their energy usage data that happens afterwards. It's better if it happens on a more real-time basis, but a decision to exclusively use the company's AMI network for VPP actuation would have the effect, whether intended or not, basically excluding a large number of other creative solutions that could work in Colorado. The third point that I wanted to make is on the importance of a complete data set being available for customer authorized third parties who may be providing an energy management system, helping customers move on to heat pumps, for example, or it could be specifically in a VPP context. So there's a number of challenges. We mentioned a couple in our comments having to do with eligibility requirements, where customers are caught in a sort of purgatory where the VPP or the aggregator can't get the information to determine whether the customer is eligible or not. And that has the effect of significantly driving up unnecessarily the cost of customer acquisition. So for example, if you have rooftop solar and you're therefore potentially not able to participate in a VPP because it's hard to distinguish momentary sunshine on the net meter versus bona fide behavioral reduction. There may be some reasons for excluding those customers, but if that data is not electronically available in a seamless permission-based manner to the third-party aggregator, we're going to have a problem. And so this is one of the big lessons learned from places like California with a lot of experience with this, is that all of the eligibility information for customers, so rules about dual participation, you can't be on a some sort of demand response program and a VPP offering at the same time. Then in the green button process, the consent process, which already exists and which Xcel has already provided, that should be the mechanism by which all of these eligibility information about that customer can be easily provided. And then with the click of a button, the VPP can say, thank you very much, we'll now enroll you, or they can say, no, thanks, you're actually not a candidate for this at this time. You would have to unenroll or do something else in order to become active. And when that's done with software in the blink of an eye, it's much more efficient than spreadsheets going back and forth and a bunch of lists being manually evaluated by teams of people, which just runs up the cost. And then the last point that I wanted to make is, let me back up. Just on the complete data set, natural gas data is also going to be important. I know there's a natural gas DR pilot that's being discussed, but it's also really important for electrification. So for a customer to have the true cost of, if I went off of the gas system for heating or water heating and moved electric, I need to know what was the gas consumption before, my gas bills before, and then what would the electric bills be on a projected basis. And so I don't actually know today whether Xcel provides natural gas data as part of Green Button, but I think it makes sense for that to be provided, because part of providing accurate economic pictures to customers is going to be the ability to quickly assess their natural gas usage history. So there's a lot of tie-ins to both for DR providers on the gas side as well as for the electrification pilots. I think including the natural gas data is also going to be really important. And a corollary of that is that if Xcel were to build sort of one-off data exchange mechanisms, batch files, spreadsheets that get emailed, things like that, for each of these different pilots, it's going to be really unnecessary costly. As we know, very little that, it's very hard for a utility to do much with its IT systems without it seeming to cost lots and lots of money. That's probably the topic of another commission proceeding. And I think it's just worthwhile that whenever we have improvements on the green button platform, those improvements would then benefit everyone. So if there's improvements on the gas side for a gas DR pilot, well, then great. Then all Colorado customers would also have the ability to use that as well. If there's user experience improvements that are made, then that would flow through to all the other users at the same time. So there's a lot of efficiencies and benefits to be gained from harmonizing around, even though these may be pilots, still, using the green button platform helps, helps us all sort of row in the same direction. And then finally, the last point I wanted to mention is on sort of an individual participant versus an aggregated model. And this is important in terms of structuring the market for the greatest, creativity and competition. As I think Commissioner Plant, you had a question to Carmen Best from Recurve about cybersecurity. And what came to mind is actually the aggregated model. So if I have a fleet of smart thermostats, I don't necessarily need individual customer data to be in my custody in order to effectively provide that service. And so there may be other, behavioral demand response where you do need those individual records from a particular home. But a smart thermostat provider might be perfectly happy with just seeing an aggregated report on their event performance. And that significantly reduces all of the cybersecurity risks that are involved. That's not to say that there are insurmountable cybersecurity risks with individual permission-based sharing. I think many of those risks are inflated. Green button standards, we do all sorts of data portability with our healthcare data and our banking data, and that all seems to work generally quite well. And so I'm not to, I don't want to make it sound as if there's these real, grave risks associated with exchanging your individual energy usage data or billing history with a third party. Nevertheless, there may be some companies who just decide it's actually not worth it for us to get the customer consent for their data sharing on an individual basis, and we're perfectly happy to look at it in the aggregate. And I think it's precisely that type of flexibility, both the individual and the aggregated model, that would allow the greatest amount of experimentation and improvement over time. So I'll leave my comments there, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. And I have one quick question. You were talking about the intersection of the AMI and activating that information, and how you think that it's not necessarily important for the management of the BPP. I'm wondering, this whole proceeding is really around third party RFP for these various services. So we're already looking outside of the monopoly utility provider model here, and how we would structure an RFP with third party providers. We've heard about a sort of a market platform being in between the utility and the BPP aggregators. And I would assume that part of that arrangement would be access to the AMI data. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that might be a part of it. Do you see that as being, as long as it's not, wholly contained within the utility, do you see that being a useful component of a platform to be able to activate the VPP capabilities of an AMI system for service of that market platform?
I absolutely do. And one of the great parts of that sort of market, sorry, I can't remember the term, market platform, market operator role, is clear, open source measurement and verification standards. And that establishes the level playing field, so that if you're an EV charger, you look a lot like a water heater, and it would be a shame to invest in a VPP solution that's exclusive to EV chargers, when the fact is that maybe water heaters could be more effective, maybe behavioral domain response could be more effective. I don't think any of us know what what the most effective options are going to be. And we just want to create the conditions where the outcomes are fairly and accurately sought and then compensated. And then let 1,000 flowers bloom, and we'll see which one eventually wins. I think that's absolutely the best way to do it. I think there's a potential problem again if the AMI network is sort of the exclusive avenue by which some sort of VPP product or service can be delivered, and that's when we'd start to see basically sort of a walled garden formation around whatever the monopoly provides, and then a very different set of offerings for the rest of the market. So I think the way that the commission's thinking about this with third parties will be competing for the services. I think that's a great way to go, but also having a common yardstick for measurement that is resource agnostic is also going to be equally important.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to respect your top of the hour commitment here. Appreciate you piping up and sharing your views. Please continue to participate in the proceeding as it goes forward. Appreciate it.
I will. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing the recording.
Thanks. All right. Next up, Sunrun. Hello,
Hey.
Mr. Woolley.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Commissioner Plant. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. Sunrun filed comments, and I won't repeat those, but just to maybe give a high-level overview, we recommend using behind-the-meter batteries to provide peak capacity needs. We think that Colorado could have a VPP program very quickly by focusing on these behind-the-meter batteries and using them for system peak needs. That really provides the highest level of value to the grid. The program could be expanded out in the future to new technologies, new services as the utility becomes more comfortable with the performance of these systems, but that would be a good place to start. We're really recommending an open pilot program rather than a targeted RFP that selects one or two vendors. An open program would if an aggregation company wanted to participate, they would have to certify, they'd have to meet certain standards. We really think that that's the best way to get the highest level of participation. In our experience, RFPs will limit the number of companies, the aggregators that can be involved. And, if Sunrun is selected and another company is not, Sunrun is likely to use the systems that our customers have. We're not likely to go and talk to Namaste Solar and get a Namaste system to be part of our VPP. So having a broadly open program, I think, is a better way to go. One example of a VPP that I'm aware of, Arizona Public Service, they ran a VPP for grid services program. It took about 18 months, and after about 18 months, it came out that the company that they had selected wasn't able to deliver the services, and so they had to cancel that. And so it was a good 2 years or 18 months down the drain that was basically wasted because only one company was selected. Last thing I would say, the Battery Connect program, we think that's a good first start, but it needs some work. Sunrun, our main concern with it is the large upfront incentive. Having a large upfront incentive is good to maybe get the battery installed, but having a very low monthly performance payments, it really it raises questions on why that battery would continue to participate from month to month and into the future. We really recommend balancing out and having a performance payment system where the value of these DER systems, that's the payment that they get on an annual basis. And we think that having a stream of benefits out into the future, that really probably mitigates the need for a very large upfront payment. So I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions. I'm a policy person, so I cover the Mountain West states, I'm not our grid services person. He had to drop for another commitment. So if it's a very technical question, I may have to get back to you on that. Thank
Okay. Well, we do have thank you. We do have the opportunity to file follow-up comments. And so if there is anything that, the grid services person wants to respond to, then we would encourage them to submit those comments through the online portal. You mentioned that you're likely to work with the technologies that you specifically are engaged with, whether it's battery storage or the solar systems. I know that you have a pilot partnership with Ford and the Lightning. And one of the concerns that came up with one of the previous presenters was that if you have those kinds of technology specific VPP engagement, you may be missing out on a lot of other benefits, whether it's your heat pump water heater or your heat pumps or your thermostats or your whatever it might be. So I just want to give you an opportunity to address that concern.
Yeah, I think you want to throw the net as broadly as possible. Yeah, if heat pumps are widely available and can be dispatched, you want to use those. As more truck manufacturers or car manufacturers are enable bi-directional charging, yeah, you want to utilize that. But my sense is there's not a lot currently existing that enables heat pumps and trucks. And so those technologies, I think, are a little further down the road. Thermostats, I think that technology is there. So I think there is some value to thermostats. That said, I think the value of behind the meter batteries is just much greater. I mean, like a Tesla Powerwall is 13 kilowatt hours, and not all of that can be, deployed at any given time, but that's a bigger impact on the grid than, turning down a thermostat.
Well, yeah, along those lines, I mean, and I mentioned this with public service when I was talking to them. I mean, we have your solar and batteries, obviously, and we have net metering. We've had net metering for many years here in Colorado, and I think Mission Data put in their comments, that in I don't know if it was California, but the net metered customers are basically pulled out of any potential of participating in VPP because they're already, contributing power to the grid when it's online. So as we're looking at, we have most of our, early adopters are already on a net metered system. A lot of those early adopters are going to be the same early adopters that you would get with behind the meter storage. How do we structure a system, or do you have any ideas around how you structure a system?
Uh-oh.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I was using these because I've been having trouble with a microphone, but see if this actually works. So how do you address that issue of these first choice customers for an energy storage system also may be excluded from participation in a VPP because they were early adopters of storage of energy of solar and they're on a net metered system. How do you construct something that's going to have enough of an incentive for that participant? I mean, do you just go the Green Mountain route and buy people batteries, or how do you do that? How do you address that?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think this is a really good question. I'm of the opinion that net metered systems, whether they have batteries or not, they provide value to the grid, and when they export power to the grid, they are compensated at the net metering rates. Now, a VPP program, what you're doing is you're adding some value on top of what that system is already providing. You are dispatching the battery to meet certain peak needs on the grid. And by doing so, by adding the capacity component, you're providing that capacity. And so the behind the meter customer should get the value of the capacity that they're providing. And so that's separate from, I think, the value of net metering. So I don't see net metering as separate from participation in a VPP. And in most markets, customers can participate in VPP programs.
So you would look at sort of an incremental value that's provided by the ability to store. And, you know, if that energy is stored at the customer premises so that it can be dispatched at a different time, there would be, through your system, I guess there would be some way of identifying, you know, that component of energy that's being delivered versus your VPP or versus your net metered, you know, a simple net metering arrangement where you're getting a net meter credit.
Yeah, that's right. You know, for customers that have a behind the meter battery and they're on residential time of use, they're going to dispatch that battery such that it maximizes their bill savings. And so they're going to dispatch the battery. They're going to soak up the power during the morning, and then they're going to dispatch it during, you know, those peak hours. But those peak hours may or may not be where the most value to the grid is. I listened to a weekly meeting of, I don't know, a couple months ago, and there was some concern on where Xcel's system peak actually was compared to, you know, the peak window. So, you know, getting the customer to do something that's different than what their rate sort of tells them to do, that is really the value that you're paying for.
Okay, and I had one question around, you know, some of the different. I think in your comments you identified these three different models. One was that Arizona model that you talked about, where there was a direct RFP with a VPP provider, and that something happened with that provider, and that the whole pilot sort of fell apart. Doesn't bode well, I guess. Then there's a couple others that you mentioned. One was an open architecture with open VPP engagement, and one was, I think, in Puerto Rico, where you had an open architecture with a limited number of companies, say 2-3 companies, and I think Sunrun was one of the companies that was identified in Puerto Rico for engagement there. And I can see how there's limitations, you know, as you were mentioning, you want to have, you know, let all the flowers bloom and open up the market. The question I have, though, is in a vertical limited market like we have here in Colorado. We're not California, and we're not a big you know, RTO or ISO. Are we able to achieve the levels of scale that would attract aggregator companies in the event that you've got multiple aggregator companies that are coming in to sort of compete for customers, or is there not enough scale for that?
Yeah. You raise, I think, a lot of good questions here. Is there enough scale in the Colorado market really to launch one of these things? And I don't know that I have a good answer for you there. My understanding is, at least from, you know, behind the meter batteries, there's not a ton of batteries on Xcel system, but it is growing over time. I think the attachment rates have increased as a result of time of use and some of the state incentives like the tax credits and other things. And so as costs drop, I fully expect that more and more batteries are going to be attached to customer systems, because it's going to make economic sense. And if there are programs like a VPP program, then it's going to increase that attachment rate even further, or make that even higher. So I think if there is a program that's available then companies like ours, national companies, and even probably local and regional companies, they're going to look and figure out how they can participate. And if the, if it's a certification program or a list of things that you have to do, then we're going to do those things because we can drive value for our customers and we can sell more batteries.
All right. Okay, thank you. One of the other things, and you may have heard me sort of asking the company about this as well. On page 5 of your comments, you mentioned that VPP should initially target the peak demand reduction and load shifting, and certainly that makes sense. But I wonder if you see that as having the greatest value on the individual distribution system, or based on a transmission on the the bulk system. Obviously the bulk system, you've got your peaker units that are are providing a potential avoided cost value that is pretty significant. But you're not going to have as many events on the bulk system as you might have on a distribution system. But on the distribution system, you may be having a variety of other benefits that are being derived from focusing on that individual distribution system peak. So I'm just wondering how you see the balance of these two feeding into a VPP program, particularly as it's related to load shifting and peak demand reduction.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's complicated, right? Running a utility is complicated. And I think you probably want to start off as simple as possible. And then as the utility learns more, you want to make things more complicated or figure out where more value can be extracted. And so it's probably starting with, the system peak on the bulk system, and then figuring out, okay, well, 6 months down the line, once once the utility has a good understanding of how these behind the meter systems can be deployed, when they understand where they're located, then figuring out, well, can we target specific feeders that are at capacity or not? I don't know that I think it would be very hard to go the other direction, to be like, okay, well, let's identify some feeders and give extra credit to those. In my experience, or in Sunrun's experience, those sorts of programs where you focus on the locational value, they're very difficult for a company like Sunrun, because it's a bunch of little rooftop systems. So you got to go to that feeder, you got to go to that neighborhood, and you got to try and sell in that. It just ends up being very difficult. And so I think our recommendation would be to start sort of top down.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Are there any other things you'd want to add?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and looking forward to engaging going forward.
Great. I'm glad you're participating, and I encourage you to continue your participation in the proceeding. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Advanced Energy United. Brian, are you there? There he is.
I am there. Hello, Commissioner. Good afternoon.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I don't have a whole lot of comments for you. Excuse me for just a minute. I am double teaming my meetings. That didn't do it. All right. Took care of it. Good afternoon. In the interest of time and of having more companies speak, I don't have a whole lot of statement to make, or I don't have slides. Just wanted to hit some of the highlights from our comments and kind of open it up to our member companies. As you know, Advanced Energy United, we represent over 100 different companies across clean energy ecosystem, of which there are multiple members that have some role in virtual power plant potential. And up until earlier, I think we've seen a few drop, but I had about 10 companies on the line here, and prepared to talk with you about answers to questions. So I hope to yield some time for them and have this be a very productive conversation. Our comments represented an aggregation of comments from about a dozen of our companies. So Also, I'm not necessarily the best one to represent them, but overarching comments. Simplify enrollment. This was also a comment from the DOE liftoff report, but we have some specific experience to share representing what the experience of companies has been about complicated versus simple enrollment processes. And just a quick data point on that. In California, for instance, where the click-through registration procedure has proven to be a major barrier to customer enrollment, and we see about 3% enrollment success for eligible technologies in people's homes. So most of this is smart thermostat data. Whereas we ran a pilot program, one of our companies ran a pilot program in San Diego territory that was an opt-out and saw 60% participation, of which only 5% opted out during the event. So it was very high participation rate when it was a simplified enrollment procedure and did not require the click-through authorizations by the customer of significant data sharing.
Can I ask you a quick question there? So your click-through is basically an opt-in, and you're saying that you had greater participation with opt-out, which I think makes sense. But is there, does the customer at some point provide the authorization for data sharing with a specific BPP provider, or how does that? Our rules require that there's approval by the customer for sharing data.
Yes.
How does that happen?
Yeah. I can't provide the exact data on that pilot program that I shared you, but I will make a note of that and provide it to you later. But I'm not saying there isn't that detailed authorization by the customer for the data sharing. That does occur. It's just a different system.
Yeah, if you could expand on that in some follow-up comments, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
I don't know if Chris Worley at Sunrun has something to add there.
Yeah,
the experience that I lack.
I can I can tell you a little bit. The customer usage data that the utility collects, we wouldn't use that. So all of our systems, all of our solar and storage systems have revenue grade meters on the inverter, and we use the data off of that. And so if as part of a VPP program, we have to prove performance, we would pull the data directly off of that inverter and provide that to the whoever was doing the evaluation. So we would not, I can think of no reason why we would request the customer usage data from the utility.
Right, and I get that, because I think Sunrun's in a little bit of a different situation. You're not, a generic VPP aggregator. You've already installed the system. You've already got the data, agreement with the customer. So I think Sunrun's probably in a little bit different position than another VPP aggregator who's maybe coming in and providing a service that they didn't install. So
gotcha. Fair point.
That makes sense. I get that. Yeah.
Although that was going to be another one of my related points about preference for device or sub-meter level data, the range of devices that are capable of providing sub-meter device level data, and that then can be used directly by the VPP provider without needing the AMI access. And amongst our members, we heard a real emphasis on the opportunity provided by that. And yeah, to the extent that sidesteps the need for customer authorization of the utility data, that can be an ingredient of simplifying the VPP enrollment. Another kind of overarching point I wanted to make, and an opportunity for this proceeding going forward and other ones, is around the increasing the standardization in VPP authorization. This is another point coming from the VPP liftoff, the DOE report. But these the aspects that would benefit from further standardization, and that we can look around the country, and that Colorado then can provide a model for other utilities in Colorado and as well as around the country. VPP, the customer enrollment we were just talking about, the evaluation approach, dispatch, and this very procurement method that you're piloting here. is one that we would like the opportunity to provide some more respond to proposals and talk about that standardization opportunity.
So let me ask you real quickly, follow up on that. So you're saying that we could create a standardization model that would be benefit to other utilities or other states. I want to steal from another state that's done it right. So is there one out there that's already been done that offers a good model, or is this something that, because it's so new and is still evolving, really we're going to have to create this thing on our own?
No, I would say that there are, we did hear from our members about several existing programs that have great aspects. Whether there's one program that has it all, I'm not sure I heard that, but we do have great examples on each of those aspects. And I think what we need is the opportunity to define what we're going for, what's the objective, and then talk about how to standardize or provide a best in class, best practice around those aspects like evaluation and dispatch requirements. And which leads me to my next point, which is, and you've heard it several times today, the grid services should drive the technologies that you're selecting for, or the design of the VPP overall. You need to identify what it is that you're looking to procure. Is it bulk grid capacity? Is it local distribution capacity? Is it ancillary services, or just energy at specific times, emergency response? And that should drive what the VPP or RFP is looking for. And yet that can still be device agnostic. The VPP aggregators, the device manufacturers can come in proposing the devices or the programs that can best meet that. Single device programs are going to meet certain needs quite well. For other needs, bulk grid capacity, for instance, mixing a variety of technologies is going to provide probably an average, a broader, a more dependable capacity resource for the utility, just because you're the benefits of diversity. Along with that kind of device agnostic, we definitely heard from our members a preference for avoiding closed system, the walled garden we've heard a couple of times here, and either a open API system or a proprietary API that licenses its technology to the device manufacturers or the VPP aggregators.
So I could ask you a similar question to what I asked with Sunrun. Is there any concern on the part of your organization or your members that because we're a limited market, that we wouldn't, if we had that kind of open, let all flowers bloom sort of an environment, we wouldn't be able to achieve scale with any individual aggregator, and therefore we wouldn't have the kind of participation that we hope for?
That's a great question. And I note from your, one of our members from AutoGrid is going to chime in here, and I think that's great. And I just wanted to note from your comments when you're asking about what's the size of the Colorado market. We are looking into that now. I don't have the answers for you now. I think that there are some rules of thumb that we can use, like 14% of all thermostats out there are smart thermostats. So what does that translate to in a Colorado context? I think that data is knowable. We're working on what we can get you. But I'd invite Shruti from AutoGrid to chime in, if that's all right.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate the opportunity. It's a great question. I just want to add a little bit more clarity and detail around the point Brian was making around the importance of open standards, open communication protocols. If a certain OEM is limiting the management of that device to certain aggregators, the concern is that those megawatts could be left unmanaged, or it could be left on, could be left out of a VPP in general. And so just bringing it back to the end customer's perspective, we want to promote customer choice to decide which EV they want to purchase, which, thermostat they want to purchase. And so the idea behind open protocols, open communication standards is that multi-asset platforms such as AutoGrid, we have a multi-asset VPP platform. We can manage and control a wide variety of devices which are deployed and adopted in the state of Colorado without leaving any off the table. And so by some providers who are both selling and installing the OEM or the device, the DER, but also managing the asset, if they keep it in their own VPP and don't allow other VPP aggregators to participate or to manage those assets, they could be left it's like unrealized value.
So you feel like there is enough, in a market the size of Colorado, there is enough aggregation potential to attract the market to participate in the Colorado market, even though we're smaller than, say, California.
Certainly, I think even the participation on this webinar workshop is evidence that a lot of VPP providers are very excited about Colorado, and we appreciate how proactive you've been in understanding some of the best practices in other regions. But I definitely think the size of your market would be, VPPs could help with a lot of different, helping serve a lot of needs for utilities, whether it's peak load reduction, daily load shifting, or frequency or bulk grid, whatever type of reliability service you're in the need for.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate you chiming in.
Thank you.
And I already made my point about the preference for device or sub-meter data, or at least the opportunity there related to AMI. I have one more point to make, and that is about the grid services that VPPs can provide. And obviously emergency or contingency situations are often likely to be the first and perhaps a higher value from that the utility might propose to go after. But we really encourage the commission to drill down into the use cases that can provide value to the system, both through this proceeding but also through other proceedings that are going on right now or may come up in the near future, such as distribution system planning, clean heat plan. I won't talk about what's in those specifically, but I do want to highlight the opportunity of those proceedings to get at and explicitly identify that as a priority for the proceeding, is how can these values, these services be served by VPPs, so that then they can inform this proceeding, if it's still ongoing, or the next round.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more that all of our proceedings are sort of becoming crisscrossed. So I have a question that I didn't see addressed in any of the comments, but you might be able to provide some insight. I don't know if any of your members, your member companies are providing smart panel services, for example. I don't know if Schneider is one of yours. I saw that they were on, I think Jeff Morris from Schneider was on earlier, and I know that they have a smart panel, of course, there's Span, some others. I'm wondering if there is a role for smart panel installers to play in the VPP market if they're engaged in that sort of market, and whether there's any additional benefit that a smart panel provides as we're looking at developing this system. Is it something that should be incentivized? Is it something that is going to contribute to the overall success of any VPP program? I know it's all relatively new, and I just didn't know if you had any members that might be able to shine some light on that.
Well, you're exactly right. Schneider Electric's one of them, and Jeff had to drop off, and I don't know the answer to your question. So all I can offer is to take it back.
We have, as I mentioned, we have the opportunity for follow-up comments to be filed online. And so please, if any participants think of additional information they'd like to provide the commission, in light of this discussion, please just submit the comments online.
Okay, and I will note that I see several of our very smart members of our member companies still on the line here. So I hope you'll open it up to some additional comments.
Well, at this point, if you're all done, Brian, the next thing in our agenda is to open it up to other folks who might be on the line who either you want to chime in and underscore somebody that made a point earlier and let us know how important that is, or if there's something that you feel like we haven't addressed that would be beneficial to these deliberations and ultimate decision, please chime in now. You can turn on your video, raise a hand. Yes. Welcome back.
Hello, Commissioner. Thank you for the opportunity. If you don't mind, I have a few. I could show a few slides, or I could just talk through a few other points I was going to highlight.
If you have some slides, that's fine. We can enable your sharing and run through those. Yeah.
You're all set up. You should be able to share your screen.
Thank you. I won't take too much more time, but I just wanted to add a little more context of points that other people made that I wanted to reemphasize, along with a couple other points that Brian made. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Maybe you could talk also about where AutoGrid falls in this sort of continuum of services and what it is.
Yes. Yeah, I realized that was a question you had for some of the previous speakers, so I definitely want to I'll introduce myself. My name is Shruti Davaluri, the head of policy and market development with AutoGrid, and AutoGrid has been in the DER management space for over a decade, and we help manage a wide variety of assets, ranging from residential loads, so including smart thermostats, behind the meter solar and storage assets, electric vehicles, along with commercial loads and along with utility scale storage and solar. And then we help manage and monetize a wide variety of value streams, such as customers' bill savings, aggregating these assets and participating in wholesale markets, participating in different demand response programs, and also offering T&D deferral. That's actually one of the topics I wanted to get into more detail. So I categorize some of the best practices or kind of the key areas I think are important for VPPs to scale moving forward. So just starting here on the top left, I'm not sure if you've seen the Brado Group wrote a value of virtual power plants report that was published earlier this year, and demonstrating the value that VPPs can bring to provide reliability services, and comparing a cost benefit analysis against a natural gas plant and a large utility scale battery. And these benefits are very impressive when compared to the other assets that VPPs can provide. However, a lot of these value streams, such as avoided T&D or avoided infrastructure costs or ancillary services, or even resiliency value that VPPs can provide, are not easily realized or actually monetized today in the market. And so I think that's one point, is ensuring that if VPPs are going to help provide targeted dispatch in a highly congested distribution zone area, for example, or if they're used for avoided infrastructure costs, making sure that we're passing on those savings to end customers and to the assets that are actually providing those benefits, which could help improve the payback period and somewhat help drive DER adoption moving forward. So making sure that we're sending appropriate price signals, for both DERs and VPPs. And this one on the top right around open standards, open APIs, I would sort of define a spectrum. I think I actually have a slide on that. There's a spectrum of communication protocols. So on one hand, you could have open standards, be it OpenADR, IEEE 2030.5, which are one efficient and cheap way to scale VPPs so that all devices can communicate via the same standard. So in the middle, we have proprietary APIs, which are basically an OEM will have an API that they will allow aggregators to have access to, but we'll also have to pay a fee. And it's important that when those OEMs make any updates to their APIs, then they also share that documentation and share that update with the aggregator. I've seen in the past that has been an issue in the past. And then here on the left, when we were talking about proprietary operating systems, proprietary APIs where they do not allow aggregators to have access to those DERs, in my perspective, that's essentially leaving megawatts on the table unmanaged and leaving these DERs out of certain VPP programs, which could hurt deployments in the long run. And again, we were discussing earlier about customer choice and making sure that, an end customer's EV choice should not prohibit them from buying a battery from another provider, or, my thermostat decision should not impact my rooftop solar, and so on. And then on the bottom left, I wanted to touch on the importance of including VPPs in near-term and long-term planning procedures. So include not only the IRPs, but also in distribution planning. So for example, when there are more EVs adopted in the state of Colorado, I'd imagine there'd be some pockets of congestion on the distribution system. And so by allowing aggregators or VPP providers to have more insight into where those congestion zones are located, then we can help target VPP deployments and targeted dispatch to help alleviate congestion on the distribution system. So I think including increasing transparency of location of congestion, and also increasing transparency around, how much value is that bringing to the grid and to the utility. And then finally, if frequency regulation is important to VPP deployments in Colorado, I would just add soliciting feedback from different OEM vendors on to some earlier speakers' points. What type of assets would we want to include? What kind of technical requirements should we define to ensure DER and behind the meter assets participation with frequency? Any questions before I?
Yeah. So you reminded me of something I wanted to actually ask some folks earlier, but I forgot. As it relates to, you mentioned, incorporating VPPs into IRPs and things of that nature. One thing that comes to mind are, required reserve margins. Is there an expectation that, I get that, maybe initial, the pilot, situation that we're talking about here isn't going to feed into that. But once you get into a mature VPP environment, can you expect that it would reduce necessary reserve margins on the system, that are a part of any kind of an overall IRP or that kind of thing? Is that something that a VPP or service that a VPP can provide?
Right. And so just to repeat back, are you asking if you're planning for a 15% planning reserve margin, can a VPP help contribute to that reliability?
Yes.
Yes. That is definitely something that VPPs are well suited to do. And I think, again, to Brian's point on how you design the VPP, like what are the key pain points that this VPP would aim to address? Do you want to roll out a VPP pilot or program where it's participating in those top 50 hours, top 100 hours, and you would only dispatch it accordingly? I think that's certainly the reliability services that are that you're referring to with resiliency planning and with the PRM is definitely something that a VPP could help contribute to.
And, as it relates to the compensation for the full value stack, a lot of what you identified there is sort of what's the distribution system value. And I don't know how familiar you are with the distribution system planning process and documentation here in Colorado. But the question I had was whether or not our DSP process is providing enough information, or if it's lacking in any particular areas that could identify those additional value streams that could be contributing to a VPP program.
I'd be happy to take a closer look and then follow up via comments.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, yeah, those were the comments I had prepared, and I'm happy to share them afterwards.
Yeah, that would be great if you could share that that stack on our documents.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate.
You bet. Thank you. And are there any other folks that are online who would like to give a perspective or chime in at this point? Going once. Oh, yes, Mr. Altas.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Commissioner, and everyone for attending this with the Colorado Renewable Energy Cooperative. And in listening today, my main concern was I never heard the word prosumer. And we're seeing a transition. It's global. There's already 2,000 renewable energy cooperatives in the EU where owners of distributed resources band together. The value equation, the Brattle document's been mentioned, the conclusion was really spectacular. The conclusion was the comparison of centralized resources to distributed resources on a virtual power plant was the only resource with a net negative cost to society. That's a really spectacular conclusion. Part of that is basically the prosumer makes the investment. It's off balance sheet to the utility, and it creates this value stack that we've heard about: ancillary services, capacity, transformer deferrals. So that's how it gets cheaper than free. The actual CapEx is paid for by the prosumer, but they generate this value stack. And so this is a new participant. The regulatory arena has some real deep thinking to do here, in that in the past, the IOU made the investment, they had a guaranteed return on investment, and the ratepayer paid it. Kind of simple in comparison to what we have now, where the investments are now being made by the prosumer, which are off balance sheet. So I've been in distributed resources since the 70s, hung the first panels. Access to the grid was a 30-year fight. And now it's an access to the value that we can create as self-generators. And there's hundreds of billions of dollars for this. I go to all the DOE, IEEE, AEE seminars looking at this. And what's really missing at every level is the simple fact that whoever makes the investment should be the one who's compensated. So in the past, the IOUs and self-generators, it was warfare. You know, there was stranded costs, exit fees, standby charges, backup fees, grid impact studies requiring us to upgrade a transformer to install a solar panel, and on and on and on and on. And now this is really shift to the point where the big value of this future energy transition is going to be created at the consumer's end of the wire, now the prosumer. And as a state, if we wanted the maximum economic impact from the energy transition in our move, we would want to do a statewide distributed energy resource accelerator that would help everybody become a prosumer. There's hundreds of billions of dollars for this. And as a regulator, how could a utility investment that is going to drive rates up still be prudent if we have a new class that wants to make the investment on their own dime outside of rates? In rates, not in rates, and the not in rates has hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies behind it. this is a really fascinating time to be on the team of self-generators. And we looked at the renewable energy co-ops in Europe banding together, and then contacted Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union, and others who are now defining energy as a crop. Whether you're growing for biofuels or agrovoltaics or, whatever the technology might be. And that kind of opened our thinking to an agricultural producers cooperative whose crop is energy and simply represents the interest of the prosumers. So a lot of the VPP aggregators right now, and you can see their business models, and they plan to get between the prosumer who made the investment and the IOU market, wherever those values can be captured. And it looks like the slice they're taking is too large. And so from an ag thing, this is the old story. Farmer gets a penny, store gets $1. And we have a real opportunity. And again, these billions of dollars of subsidies, hundreds of billions of dollars, to help our consumers. And talking with some economists at CSU as well about what happens when energy dollars go into the pockets of local prosumers. The consumers used to pay a bill and that money would leave the community forever. Well, in this prosumer model, the energy dollars, savings plus revenues, values, go into the local pockets where it's respent. And the economic multiplier projections of the transition from exporting dollars and importing energy to local production of energy and circulation of those dollars is orders of magnitude. And just from an economic development standpoint as a state, we really need to add the prosumer as a new class entirely. He's going to make an investment at no cost to ratepayers and wants to work with the grid or the virtual power plant to create maximum value. That's in the interest of who made the investment. In this case, getting the prosumer maximum value lowers rates to everyone. And just fascinating time to be here. And thanks for everyone for working on this. And just lastly, in all these national conferences, I've asked the same question. How does the prosumer value? How does he get an appraisal of the value he can deliver? Who's doing measurement and verification of value? Now, a lot of IOUs, like when you're talking capacity, well, we have stranded costs. You owe us an exit fee. And so to them, there's no value of the capacity at all. And then in a lot of forums, Rocky Mountain Institute's VPP and a lot of meetings and a lot of DOE on this, I asked the same question. How do we measure and verify and certify the value of a distributed resource in a third-party neutral way? A lot of VPP aggregators say that value is actually IP. How much value they can capture is their industrial secrets. Well, how does the prosumer who creates the value negotiate with one of two entities, either the IOU who says, hey, you've got no capacity value or the VPP aggregator who says that value computation is an industrial secret. So the person who made the investment, if this was real estate, and you have a business, you can call an appraiser who tells you what the value of your investment is before you make the investment. And the prosumer right now doesn't have that ability. I would, you need a friend of a court in this context, a third-party neutral measurement and verification entity. And Ziani, I think, mentioned it earlier. The CSU Energy Institute is an ideal measurement and verification certification type platform. So is NREL. And so when we're talking about value, how we're going to capture value for the ratepayer, how we're going to capture value for the prosumer, we really need a third-party element to do that in a really neutral way. And again, just thank you for all the effort and consideration.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks for your comments. And I'd urge you to look through the questions that we had in the proceeding. They're all on the docket, and you can take a look at that. And if you want to submit your comments as well, I mean, we have them here in the video, but any other thoughts that you have, this is the points you've made are exactly what we're trying to figure out through this proceeding. So appreciate your participation and appreciate hearing from you. Thanks a lot. Hello, Mr. Hannigan.
Commissioner Plant, how are you? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to have you on.
Thank you. I'm sitting in my solar powered Tesla Model Y here, thinking about how I'm going to harness these distributed resources for the value of the grid. So thank you for provoking some thinking. I'm Brian Hannigan. I'm president and CEO of Holy Cross Energy. We are a rural electric cooperative out in the western Colorado mountains, about 2 hours west of Denver. A couple of things that make us a unique contributor to this conversation is that by the end of the calendar year, we will be approaching 90% carbon free in our electricity content that we'll be delivering to our co-op members in the Roaring Fork, the Eagle Vale, and the Colorado River valleys. We have a goal of reaching, as you know, 100% clean energy by 2030. And something that is not contested by any of our members or our communities, our board of directors, or any of the leaders at Holy Cross is that distributed energy resources are going to be absolutely vital to ensuring that we can meet the last 10% with reliability, affordability, safety, and sustainability. We are already engaged in a number of what I would call quote unquote small VPP activities. For example, we have a battery storage program called Power Plus that we are partnering with our members. We're providing them with zero money down, 0% on tariff financing options to take power walls into their homes or their businesses. And in addition to those incentives up front, we are paying, in a sense, a capacity credit directly to the prosumer for the right to use that battery for grid services. So we can manage and discharge and dispatch that battery that's on the consumer's premises, as long as we keep the charge range of charge between a certain preset agreed amounts. We're able to use that battery to help load shift and to help peak shave, two of the values that you've heard mostly about today. We are also doing the same thing in partnership with ChargePoint with managed EV charging, and we look forward to expanding that once bidirectional charging becomes a feature, whether it's through the Ford Lightnings or through Nissan Leafs or any of the vehicles that are out there, modulating the rate of charge and even discharging vehicles back to the grid offers, as you've heard from others, a tremendous opportunity for grid flexibility. It's going to be so important to meeting that last 10 or 20% of our carbon-free ambitions. We also have had, since 2018 now, 4 homes in an affordable housing development in Basalt, Colorado. The Basalt Vista project was our earliest foray into VPPs. Each of the 4 homes have a PV system on the rooftop, battery inside the building, level 2 EV charger that could be modulated and controlled, an air source heat pump and heat pump water heater. We found tremendous value in partnering with our Habitat for Humanity chapter in order to deliver those. And as we look at affordable housing, which is a huge issue in Colorado, we're working with all of our local stakeholders to try to figure out how can that affordable housing begin to participate in providing grid services as a way of addressing the energy costs, in addition to the reliability and the resilience of the energy supply that's being provided already on the grid. These have all given us a really good feel, I think, for how to interact in a world where we see more prosumers, more virtual power plants, more distributed energy resources. And as a utility, we're leaning forward and thinking about how we can actually foster the uptake of grid-friendly distributed energy resources, meaning we would like them to consume power when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, and we would like for them to at least not consume power to the extent possible, or even better yet, provide power back to the grid at a time where maybe we need some help And we'd rather not go to the wholesale market. We'd rather not fire up a peaker gas plant or do anything that incurs emissions. This is putting us into a different position as a utility, because for most of our experience, the utilities have made the revenue that they need to sustain the grid by either building it into the rate base and recovering it if they're an investor-owned utility, or in our case, by selling kilowatt hours to our members and including the delivery costs associated with the electricity in the cost of the electricity itself. And so one of the things that I hope you can consider strongly is that in a world where we have many, many prosumers and many, many DERs and all the goodness that you've heard about for the last 3 hours, what does that mean for the financial model of the utility? What does that mean, as you've rightly commented on, for net metering programs as they exist today? Who pays for the grid? When do we pay for the grid? How do we pay for the grid? Because if there's one thing that I know, it doesn't matter whether you're a prosumer, a consumer, or a producer, you need the electric grid to move your product from point A to point B. And so I'll leave you with this last thought. Our board has started to think of ourselves more as a distribution system operator. If you want to think of it another way, we aspire to become a world-class delivery company, delivering electrons from point A to point B, regardless of who those electrons belong to or where they're going to. And if you think about the role of the distribution utility with that in mind, you realize very quickly there's an analog on the wholesale market where we have transmission providers that are delivering electricity from point A to point B. Their systems are open access to anyone who wants to connect to them. Their systems are also priced equally, regardless of whose electricity that it is. And I'll leave you with a thought question. Is that something that we should be aspiring to do also at distribution here in Colorado as a way to unlocking the value of VPPs as we move forward towards our clean energy and our climate goals?
Thank you, Mr. Hannigan. I appreciate your contribution, and those are great points. I think, yeah, we're hearing comments addressing those various different concerns and visions as well, and the open architecture and an open market for participation and the value that the distributed system can provide. So appreciate that, and thank you for your leadership there at Holy Cross.
Thank you. I do have one minor substantive question to lay out, and this can be addressed by the company at another time.
Yeah.
But obviously VPPs can be composed of assets in various locations. I'm wondering if the company anticipates engaging consumers, particularly when we look at maybe an electric replacement for a gas demand. That begins to bring in questions of service territories. I know, for example, that we have places in Carbondale where we both share electric service, where they may serve gas and we may serve electric. I think those will be details that we'll want to watch out for to make sure that we're not inadvertently creating some more difficulties on the utility side by looking at VPPs, which again, we fully support and would love to help accelerate.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. We do have some areas of sort of split providers and where we are collecting the money for various programs versus where we're delivering those services is going to be a critical issue. So appreciate you bringing that up.
Great, thank you, and thank you for having this this open session.
Thank you, Mr. Ewing.
Hi, thank you, Commissioner Plant. I'll be very quick. I see the audience is shrinking rapidly. I just want to make a couple of very, very high-level quick points. First, would second Sunrun's point that a open incentive program is going to be much more effective at rapidly deploying resources and RFP. We agree that there are problems with Sunrun's explanations of the problems with RFPs, and they can often end up selecting overly ambitious bidders who are not always able to perform on what they promise. I'd also point out that you asked several folks the question whether the market in Colorado is big enough for aggregators to come in. From C-Power's perspective, I didn't ask that question necessarily internally, but I did ask a question because we had raised the point that to attract outside aggregators, to attract a diversity of providers, that the market does need to be sized sufficiently to do so. From our perspective, we would typically not participate unless the market's about 50 megawatts or more. So that's just maybe one data point. But it also should be balanced with the duration of the program. So I think our other point was that the incentives or whatever the revenue is, or whatever the program provides, it should be of sufficient duration to make the startup costs worthwhile and to be able to account for those over time. One program that we would point to as a potentially successful program is out of Connecticut, not integrated with the market. So the fact that it's in a deregulated market, I don't think matters, but it is probably has a lot of similarities to the Battery Connect program at Excel, but it's a battery incentive program that has effectively enrolled 75 megawatts of C&I battery dispatchable batteries. So I will follow up on that with more detail and comments, but we would cite to that as a successful program. So with that, I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and definitely plan to follow up further with in reply comments.
Thank you, Mr. Ewing. And does CPower work primarily with C&I customers, or do you work across the board with?
We in theory work across the board, but in reality generally work mostly with C&I customers.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Are there any other folks on the line that would want to chime in here? Yes, Mr. Shorsky.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that may or may not have been self-evident, but I wanted to strongly endorse the views of the folks that basically said, let's not have this be an IOU-centric event in terms of what the kinds and entities that can offer VPPs. I think it's always a danger with PUCs and IOUs that just kind of creates a default scenario in which the IOU is considered to be sort of the hub of the system. And I think when we're offering a pilot program of this kind, there ought to be some kind of a formal mechanism whereby there is by some form of PUC edict or invitation or however it works, there's a clear and specific invite to a variety of entities to participate, whether they be, as Brian described, overlapping territories of other types of utilities, or co-ops or other kinds of aggregations. So I just wanted to be specific on that point, because there's such a huge potential here. It would be a shame if all of this was filtered through one IOU's lens.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And that's, really gets back to sort of the genesis of this MDOC. It was that concern and our desire to help create an RFP that would bring third parties in and bring the private market in to see what kind of innovations we could take advantage of through third parties. So appreciate that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are there any other comments before we sign off? Once, twice. Okay, I just want to thank everybody for participating. Just to give you an idea of what our schedule is from here on out, we're going to have follow-up questions that we'll issue from the commission here on October 20th. Comments and responses will then be due on November 3rd, and we will have a follow-up workshop to follow on to this, although we don't have a time identified right now. I would expect that the next workshop is going to really focus on what I identified at the beginning of this proceeding as the main objectives that are in the commission order. And those 4 objectives are identifying the core objectives and timelines for the 3 pilots, setting the main technical cost and time parameters for RFPs, establishing milestones for the RFPs, and then setting operational and reporting milestones for the pilots. So that's going to be really a focus, I think, of the next workshop, but we'll announce that after we get our the next follow-up comments submitted. Again, thank you all very much for participating. And with that, we are adjourned.